it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Tonight, for the first time, I present all 10 chapters of this incredible story. The following information comes from entries provided by Inspector Eleanor Darcy and her partner, Inspector Harris Mackenzie. Both were agents with Project Inferno during the late 19th century. And Project Inferno was an experimental program overseen by several prominent political figures. It would be adapted into the Bureau of Investigation, BOI, by Attorney General Charles J. Bonaparte, before coming under the management of Attorney General George W. Wickersham in 1909. The Bureau of Investigation would later become what we now know as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. This forerunner experimental program, known as Project Inferno, aligned renowned detectives with criminal-coded individuals to assist local police departments across America. Since it transitioned into a more legitimate agency, Project Inferno has been forgotten due to its morally questionable decisions and lack of government regulation. The following entries from Inspector Darcy and Inspector Mackenzie detail a brief glimpse of how this program functioned. These entries have been updated to adhere to contemporary English. Translation errors have been accounted for, but the story remains relatively the same nonetheless. Now, legally, this piece must be promoted as fictitious. Everything you're about to read may or may not have happened. The final verdict will be left up to the reader's interpretation to determine the validity of these events. The Wormwood Murders by Impossible Bit 995. Chapter 1. Sunday, October 4th, 1891. Inspector Harris Mackenzie. Believe nothing you hear, and only half what you see. Edgar Allan Poe wrote that in one of his stories. I couldn't help but think about that quote as I rode on the train. My personal cabin was cemented in darkness. Shutters drawn, door closed, lights off. It was only me and my thoughts. Oh, the bustle of the train car, the smell of percolating coffee and burning tobacco. The outside world existed. I knew this without a shadow of doubt. I'm not so naive to believe otherwise. But in that moment, when you're inside the abyss, can you really be sure? Believe nothing you hear and only half what you see. What do you believe when you can't see anything, though? The cabin door opened. Lantern light poured into the room, sending the shadows into a frenzy. Inspector Darcy stood in the doorway. She was tan with thick black hair pushed back on her head, a hard jaw and broad shoulders, long of leg with a lean frame. Most agents within the program mistook her for a man at first glimpse. The fact that she wore a suit didn't help this matter. Inspector Darcy's choice of attire and occupation was the source of much animosity and debate, a scandal of sorts. Well, minimal if you ask me, but from the perspective of others, it was an urgent matter, one requiring almost too much conversation and focus. While Inspector Darcy tried to conceal her exasperation, especially when we were out in the field, I could still see it. Those thoughts, those stares, they bothered her, no matter how hard she tried to ignore them. I couldn't blame her. It would bother me too. But as Hume once said, prejudice is destructive of sound judgment and perverts all operations of the intellectual faculties. There is no greater tragedy than that of bias impairing sound judgment. Unfortunately, our society is prone to bias, and as a result, our judgment is greatly impaired, especially when it comes to tradition and reason. "We'll be arriving soon," Inspector Darcy said, hanging the lantern on a nearby hook. "Get your things ready." "Yes, ma'am." I grabbed my luggage from the overhead compartment and followed her out of the lounge area. We sat across from each other and watched the landscape pass by in a blur of colours. The city came into view, shrouded by mist, both from the dew and the industrial smokestacks. Want one?" Inspector Darcy asked, opening a new carton of sweet corporal cigarettes. With the carton came a collector's card featuring Maud Adams, some stage actress. I didn't recognize her, but I also wasn't one for theatre productions or actors. Most of my entertainment came from books. Inspector Darcy lit her cigarette before lighting mine. We sat in momentary silence, listening to the whistles and bells of the train as we came into the station. Outside rain streaked across the windows. a storm was approaching. The other passengers rose, quick to get off the train. We waited in our seats until everyone else had departed. Inspector Darcy slipped on a hooded rain cape, and I retrieved a bottle of laudanum from my luggage and swallowed about a teaspoon. "Hey, I thought I told you to ease back on that," she said. "Counselor's orders," I said, but honestly, it didn't matter whether the counselor prescribed it or not. I would have kept taking laudanum. "It clouds your mind," she said. "I need you clear." "Well, it takes off the edge," I countered. "You wouldn't want me to act impulsively, would you?" She scoffed. "That trick won't work on me anymore, Harris. Cut back or I'll be forced to write you up." The last of the passengers stepped off the train. We rose from our seats and started down the walkway toward the nearest exit. At the station, we were met by the Chief of Police, Boris McPherson, a portly man with greying hair. He wore the regular navy blue police uniform most officers donned. A polished badge hung from his left side. A revolver was holstered on his right hip, and a baton on his left. "Chief Burris," Darcy said. "Inspector Eleanor Darcy." She then gestured to me. "My partner, Inspector Harris Mackenzie." He nodded indifferently. "Private hacksaws from upstate. Heard a little through grapevine about your operation. Which one of you is the lunatic?" I raised my hand. "I'd be the mutt, sir." "Well, just so you know, we'll be keeping a close eye on you," he said. "One false move, we'll put you down, boy. We've got a signed warrant to make it official and everything." It was hard not to laugh. That warrant wasn't anything new. Inspector Darcy had one, as did every other inspector part of Project Inferno. If his goal was to intimidate me, he should have fired on sight. Might have made both our lives easier. "Understood, sir," I said. "Should we get to the Undertaker's office now?" Well, at this, the chief grimaced. About that. Might have to make a quick stop along the way. There's been a recent development." "How recent?" Inspector Darcy asked. "Within the last hour or so." I glanced at the inspector. We were thinking the same thing. This killer's working fast. With our luggage in tow, we piled into a carriage and started through the city. It was your run-of-the-mill metropolis. Tall brick buildings packed close together, overcrowded streets, smog and sickness in the air, people on the sidewalks, most dressed in rags and covered in soot. But as we advanced north, their clothes became nicer and their skin cleaner. "Are you sure this murder is connected with the other two?" Inspector Darcy asked the chief. He nodded. "Left a message behind as he did with the other crime scenes. That piece of evidence hasn't been released to the press yet." "Oh, there goes any hope of a copycat," I muttered. "Who's our most recent victim?" "John Ullers," he said. "Owner of a few plants in the area. Members of his staff found him at one of his steel mills." "Any connection to the other victims?" The two other victims were Richard Howards, a wealthy investor from New York looking to spread his wings, and Thomas Banks, a local land agent with a monopoly on most real estate in the area, especially farmland on the outskirts of the city. "As far as we can tell, no established connections," the chief said. "But in Wormwood, everyone's connected. We started as a small farming community after all." "Look at you now," I said. "Watch your dog. This city ain't perfect, but at least we don't let criminals run free." "Could have fooled me." "Chief," Inspector Darcy interjected, "tell us more about the crime scene." He glanced out the window. The carriage driver hollered at the horses, and we came to a gradual stop. "Well, I won't have to tell you," he said. "Might as well take a look for yourselves. But I should warn you, it's not a pretty sight, especially for a lady." "We'll manage," I said. The chief glared at me, and Inspector Darcy refrained from reacting. I couldn't tell if she wanted to laugh or scold me, probably both. We exited the carriage and entered the steel mill. The air stank of copper and coal, but it was quiet. With the murder, the entire staff had been given a day off. First time for everything. We were led to the main floor where a majority of the machinery was housed. Conveyor systems to transport raw materials, darkened furnaces overflowing with ashes. Moisture trickled from the pipes overhead. Blood splattered against the floor. Inside the workshop were several officers and 5 men, workers covered from head to toe in grease and sweat. Their hands were caked with blood. One of them, the youngest of the lot, had swollen eyes as if he'd been crying. The victim, Johnson Ullers, hung a few inches off the ground, suspended by a trolley hook through his back. His torso was lined with deep lacerations. Some exposed inner muscle, a few even showed bone. Strangest of all, though, was his face, mutilated beyond recognition. A younger woman with long red hair inspected the body. She wore heavy-duty rubber boots and gloves with a leather apron. Metal instruments peered out from the center pocket. "Inspectors," the chief said, "this is Siler Barrett, a local surgeon. Been helping with the crime scene due to the Undertaker Barrett's decline in health." "Father?" I asked. "My uncle," she said, smiling. "His age has gotten the best of him. Can't leave the office much these days." "Well, let's get the body down so we can inspect it," Darcy said. And then to the chief she said, "Separate and isolate the witnesses. We'll question them one by one in a few minutes." "Yeah, we'll start with the oldest," I said. "Finish with the youngest. Make sure they don't talk to each other until we have interviewed them." The chief relayed the orders to his officers while we worked with the surgeon in preparing the body for transport. "The victim is Johnson Ullers," the surgeon recounted clinically. 52, male Caucasian. Multiple stab wounds about the abdomen and chest. Most likely died from hemorrhaging. She moved about with expertise, as if this was nothing new. I'm not one to complain about a dead body. Darcy and I had seen our fair share during our time with Project Inferno, but the smell was starting to encroach. Feces and decay. I lit another cigarette to help keep it at bay. "The victim has bruising around the neck," the surgeon continued. "Discoloration in the face. The victim was strangled. Suspension cut off circulation." "He, open his eyes," I said. The surgeon stopped and looked back at me. Inspector Darcy nodded, and the chief gave her approval to continue. The surgeon peeled back the victim's eyelids. The sockets were empty. "The victim's eyes were gouged out," she said, moving her fingers down to his lips. "Tongue was severed as well. Looks like it was removed with a straight-edged blade. Possibly a shaving razor or a scalpel or maybe surgical scissors." "And, the ears?" I asked. She paused to collect herself before turning the head from one side to the other, showing us the profile of the victim's face. His ears were missing. From the looks of it, they'd been partially sawed at until the killer grew impatient and ripped them off. Chief Burris pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed it at his brow. He began to pace, shaking his head while muttering prayers under his breath. Some of the officers retreated, looking a little green around the gills. A sight like that makes your stomach twist itself into knots, makes your chest tight. But for me, I was curious. Why take the eyes, the tongue, and ears while leaving everything else intact? Trophies, maybe. Our killer was either deeply disturbed or trying to get at something. "You mentioned the killer had left a message," Inspector Darcy said, lighting another cigarette for herself. Chief Burris led us away from the body to the back of the room. On the far wall, written in blood, was, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Why does this sound familiar?" Inspector Darcy asked. "It's from something, right?" "It's a line from a sonnet," I said. "Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. I read it in a collection of his poems, Rosalind and Helen." "Percy Shelley, he was, "The husband of Mary Shelley. She wrote a few books, most notably Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, back when she was maybe 18 or 19. Died about a decade before the war." "And him?" "Dead too. Drowned in a boating accident, I believe." "Hey, you a professor or something?" Chief Burris asked, his disgust apparent. "He likes books," Inspector Darcy answered for me, and she quickly moved on. "Chief, exactly how was the body discovered?" He dragged the handkerchief across his face, but he couldn't wipe away his apprehension. His hesitation only made me more curious, and the air grew thick with tension. He was hiding something. "Those 5 you saw before aren't just witnesses," he admitted. "They're accomplices." "Accomplices?" Inspector Darcy remarked. "Is there a reason they're not in irons?" "Well, it's complicated. They said someone came in late last night. Only shift managers were still on the clock. They held the men at gunpoint and forced them to... Well, you saw the body for yourselves." How convenient. Men working hard labor were forced to murder their boss. A fantasy I'm sure plenty have on a daily basis. Whether they care to admit it or not, that is. But I couldn't say that out loud, not without enduring the wrath of Chief Burris and the disappointment of Inspector Darcy. "We need to question those men immediately," Darcy said. "We'll also need the accountant's records." You tax auditors now too?" Chief Burris asked. We're just being thorough." Chapter 2. Sunday, October 4th, 1891. Inspector Eleanor Darcy. After the surgeon's assistant, Ms. Barrett, bagged the body, Inspector Mackenzie and I were given access to a private office to conduct our interviews on site. While we waited for one of Chief Burris's officers to collect the first witness, I sat at the desk and prepared my logbook. Pages and pages of previous interviews, witness testimonies from dozens of other cases, none quite as gruesome as this. Since the start of Project Inferno, I've been privy to multiple murders, but already I could tell this assignment was different. To remove a person's ears, eyes, and tongue, it was barbaric, practically torture. Then to hang the corpse on a hook, to put him on display fully for anyone to see. It made me sick, but I was careful to keep my nerves suppressed. We'd started on a bad footing with the police chief. I didn't want to incite any further doubts, and it goes without saying, Inspector Mackenzie was someone you didn't want to show weakness to. Back when we were first partnered, my superiors had warned me about him. They told me he could act irrationally at times, that he would be dangerous. I was instructed to treat him like a dog, keep a tight leash around his neck, and if I didn't, there would be hell to pay. I glanced up from my logbook. Inspector Mackenzie leaned against a lateral filing cabinet across the room, rubbing at the stippled hairs on his beard. He was contemplative, lost in thought, desperately trying to solve the puzzle when we didn't possess enough pieces yet. A part of me wanted to laugh. The laudanum didn't seem to be helping much with his anxiety. I had to wonder how much it alleviated his melancholia. Project Inferno's chief counselor had said 3 doses of laudanum a day would help keep Inspector Mackenzie regulated, but the longer we worked together, the more I began to doubt that. "What is it?" I asked. "You seem perturbed." "This is methodical," he said. "This isn't like any other murder we've experienced. The killer is forcing others to do their bidding. Why?" "Maybe they don't want to get their hands dirty," I offered. "Maybe the blood and viscera makes the killer squeamish." If that were true, then they wouldn't kill to begin with. He wasn't wrong. After the war, most people showed a public abhorrence for violence. They loathed it, but some seemed to have been inspired by it. That chaos we faced awakened something in people, opened their eyes to a way of life they might not have considered before. No, that's not right. They considered it. Everyone considers it. Violence is at our core as human beings. But before the war, they tried to hide it from the rest of society, afraid they might be cast out, exiled. What bothers me is the message. "Ozymandias," I said. "It's like they want us to know which crime scenes are connected." "Well, most artists sign their works," Inspector Mackenzie said clinically. "I imagine it gives the killer a sort of pleasure to leave behind breadcrumbs. It's a game of cat and mouse. They want to be special, to be noticed." "Careful," I warned him. "You're speculating now. If you establish a motive now, you'll end up ignoring all other evidence that doesn't support your hypothesis." He smiled. Most times it was hard to differentiate Harris from a normal person and a stark raving lunatic, as my superiors had categorized him, that is. But when he smiled like that, it couldn't be easier. there was, well, something off-putting about it, especially in his eyes. The way he looked at the world like a meal to be consumed rather than a place to be explored and enjoyed. The only time he ever felt satisfaction was when he'd encountered a person or situation as atypical as him. "Speculating is my job, Inspector," he said. "I'm the dog and you're the handler. Point me in a direction and send me on a hunt. I'll bring back whatever I find." Well, I met him with a curt nod, hoping to appear indifferent while the rest of me was afraid. For the time being, rein it in. I don't need theories yet. I need help getting the situation under control. Then, once we have secure footing, we can go on a fox hunt. He straightened and gave me a mock salute. "Whatever you say, ma'am." That's when a knock came at the door. It opened, and an officer led in the first witness, the oldest of the 5 steel mill workers, heavy-set and wearing a pair of stained overalls, the usual factory garb. "Mr. Turner?" I greeted, standing and holding out my hand for him to shake. "Please, take a seat." The man had just found his chair, and I was in the process of asking if we could get him anything, a cigarette, a glass of water, when Inspector Mackenzie cut in with the first question. "You found the body, is that right?" The man nodded. "Yes, sir. Me and the 4 other boys." "But you didn't just find it." No, sir. We were working late when we were approached by a man." "What did this man look like?" Mr. Turner shifted in his chair. Inspector Mackenzie moved closer, hovering over his left side. I wanted to snap at him to back up, but he had that look in his eyes. He really was a dog, and currently he was sniffing something out. During my time with Mackenzie, I found it better to let him work at his own pace. He was good at digging up bones, no matter how deep they were buried. "Well, I didn't get much of a look at him," Mr. Turner said. "He was wearing a mask, a burlap sack with eye holes cut out." "Clan member, maybe?" I asked. "Unlikely," Inspector Mackenzie said. "Victims don't fit their usual targets." "I don't think he was with a group," Mr. Turner said. He was acting alone." "And he carried a gun?" Inspector Mackenzie asked. "Did you recognize the make and model?" "A revolver of some kind. I've never been one for guns." "Was the barrel long or short?" Short." "Did it have any engravings?" Mr. Turner frowned, annoyed now. "Not that I can recall." I jotted down the information in my ledger while Inspector Mackenzie continued to bombard him with questions. Rapid fire, one after the other, with little time to breathe in between. "Did he hold the gun in his left hand or right?" Left hand," Mr. Turner said. "Are you positive about that?" "Absolutely." "What kind of clothes was the man wearing?" "Trousers and boots. He had a long coat on, too." "Did he speak?" "Not too much. When he did, it was barely a whisper. Soft-spoken, but he let his gun do most of the talking." "That's funny," Inspector Mackenzie said. "I didn't think guns could speak." Well, I shot him a look, and he retreated from Mr. Turner. Then I started with my own questions. "Why do you think this man might have targeted Mr. Ullers?" "I couldn't tell you, ma'am," Mr. Turner said. "We just did as we were asked." "Was Ullers a decent boss?" Inspector Mackenzie asked. "I don't see why that has to do with anything." "It's just a question, sir." Mr. Turner contemplated this with a furrowed brow, weighing his choices internally. "Mr. Ullers paid us in a timely manner. Hours were long, work was hard, but he's given us opportunities when no one else in the area would." "Yet you didn't hesitate to participate in his murder." Mr. Turner jumped up from his seat, purple at the neck. "Now you just hold on a second. We didn't have a choice in the matter. Our lives were on the line." "Please calm down, Mr. Turner," I said, affecting a delicate tone. "No one here is blaming you. We just want to find out what happened." "You might not be blaming anyone, Missy, but your friend here is making implications that I don't care for." "I'll forgive him. He's a little irregular. He'll be quiet for the rest of your interview." I met Inspector Mackenzie's gaze, trying to command him with my eyes alone. Surprisingly, Mackenzie backed down and retreated to the far wall, his arms folded across his chest, his lips pursed with a self-gratifying smile. "Now, Mr. Turner," I said, "maybe we should start from the beginning." For the next 20 minutes, Mr. Turner told us about the encounter. He, along with the other 4 men, were working late, trying to get production ahead of schedule for when the rest of the workforce returned on Sunday evening. Apparently they only worked half days on Sundays. Johnson Ullers came in to check on their progress, but he didn't come alone. He was accompanied by a masked figure. From there, Mr. Turner's account of events became tentative. It brought great discomfort for him to describe the murder, especially when the killer supplied them with knives to butcher their former employer. He struggled to speak much without gagging. "And who removed the eyes, ears, and tongue?" Inspector Mackenzie asked at the end of Mr. Turner's story. "You or the masked man?" Mr. Turner looked away and puked. He wiped bile from his mouth and rose. I reached for the revolver holstered on my side, but it was too late. He was on top of Mackenzie, hands around his neck, slamming him against the wall while screaming at the top of his lungs. "I'll kill you," he said. "You rotten little bastard." It took 3 officers to drag Mr. Turner away. Thankfully, Chief Burris was already back at the department, having transferred the victim's corpse with the surgeon's assistant. Otherwise, he might have been promptly removed from the crime scene. Project Inferno had authority across the country, but it was a fickle authority, one that could have crumbled if enough political figures got involved, such as local mayors or governors. If we were lucky, the officers wouldn't report the incident. While we waited for the second witness, Inspector Mackenzie rubbed at his neck. Bruises were already starting to show. Admittedly, this brought a small sense of pleasure. Sometimes he didn't know when to quit. It was nice for others to remind him when he'd gone too far, and that way I didn't have to do it myself. "You were a little hostile during that interview," I said. "Maybe you shouldn't lead the witnesses like that." "Well, he's got quite the temper, doesn't he? Wonder if the rest of them are like that." "If you're not careful, you'll find out soon enough." His gaze turned cold then. "We should conduct our interviews in the exact manner. Same questions, and be sure to record their answers verbatim." I frowned. "What are you getting at, Harris?" "You're a senior inspector. I'm sure you can figure it out." Well, slowly the pieces came together. He was goading the witnesses on purpose, trying to draw something out of them. "Fine," I said, "but I'm holding you responsible for anything that happens." "Understood," he said. "You want to be the kiss or the punch?" I snorted at this. "You even need to ask?" For the next hour or so, we went through 3 more witnesses. Mackenzie interrogated them in the same manner as Mr. Turner, applying more pressure with every question. I snuck in when I could, trying to pacify any malice, but there came a point when all I could do was watch as the witnesses screamed at Mackenzie, threatening to have him reported. By the time we got to our last witness, the interviews had taken us in several different directions. 2 had claimed the masked man held the gun with his left hand. The other 2 claimed it was with his right. Some described the weapon with a short barrel, others with a long one. A few said it had engravings, swirling patterns, and others said there was no pattern at all. Yet each and every witness had described the masked stranger exactly the same. They'd given the same height, build, and soft-spoken manner. Burlap sack with eye holes cut out. "There was no gun," I muttered, more to myself than Harris. You're starting to catch on." He borrowed a cigarette from my pack and lit it. "It's a good excuse, isn't it? Masked man threatens you and your co-workers to kill your boss. What else are you supposed to do other than comply?" "So you think they made up the masked man?" "I wouldn't be so sure about that. We have 2 other bodies. All 3 crime scenes had Ozymandias left behind. I think there was a man, but I don't think he threatened our witnesses. I think they were willing accomplices." I drummed my fingers against the desk. Well, hate him or love him, Harris had a way with criminal behavior. He was exactly what Project Inferno wanted. The perfect tool for an inspector to use. A way for us to keep our hands clean while combing through the filth of society. "Why?" I asked. "Long wages, long hours, hard work. They were all shift managers. No room for advancement, which means no more promotions. Their pay had turned stagnant. Killing Ullers wouldn't change any of that, I said. With Ullers gone, who takes over the business? I gritted my teeth. Situations always had a way of becoming worse, and Harris was keen to seek out the worst in humanity. He could make a sunny day miserable. Careful, I said. This is pure conjecture. You have no solidified evidence to support that. He nodded. And I imagine we won't have any evidence to support until we find our killer and question them. Even then, the word of a lunatic doesn't carry much weight. Whether these men acted of their own volition or not does not matter. They'll never see chains. You're treading dangerous waters, I said, reaching for my service weapon. Get back in line, or you'll be punished accordingly. Go ahead, Inspector, draw your revolver. No one would bat an eyelid if you executed me. You wouldn't even be reprimanded. Inspector Mackenzie liked to test my patience. Our superiors had warned me about that too. He saw people as puppets, playthings, showed little empathy for their wants or concerns. To him, we all lived in his world, and he wanted to see what he could make us do. That was part of the reason he'd been noticed by the agency. His studies and practices were what got him detained and labeled morally insane. In the beginning, the director was hesitant to partner us. He didn't know if I had the experience or aptitude to handle someone like Mackenzie. But it didn't matter what anyone back at the agency thought. Harris refused to work with the other inspectors. Their only choice was to either give him to me or lock him away. I guess they figured he was of more use in the field than rotting in a cell, so they took the risk. Sometimes I wondered if we wound up together on purpose. Without him, my career was dead in the water. It's difficult to convince anyone that a woman could be an inspector, and this was made only harder by my lack of resources. If nothing else, Harris was a good resource for me to utilize. On occasion, though, he proved quite a nuisance too. In life, it's give and take. You have to balance the consequences and rewards to determine if you're getting the short end of the stick. At that time in my career, Harris was a necessary component. That's not to say I was bad at the job, but because of him, I advanced quickly through the ranks. Earned a respectable wage, gained plenty of experience too. As time went on, my need for him reduced. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the last witness. Years younger than the rest, tall and lanky with peach fuzz on his upper lip. His eyes were bloodshot. He'd been crying. The blood had been washed from his hands, but he still carried that burden on his shoulders. "Please, take a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "I'm sorry, but no one ever gave me your name." "Henry," he said. "Henry Ullers." Mackenzie glanced at me then, eyes narrowed. He moved in fast, a shark encroaching its prey. "I hope you don't mind me saying," Mackenzie remarked, "but you seem a little young to be a shift manager." "I'm not a shift manager," Henry admitted. "I wanted to be someday." "Was Mr. Ullers your father?" I asked. Henry nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm sorry to hear that. Can't imagine how hard this must be right now." "Thank you, ma'am." Mackenzie moved in and leaned against the desk. Henry scooted back in his chair to put distance between them, but Mackenzie inched closer. "You have any other siblings, Henry?" he asked. "Brothers, sisters, maybe an uncle?" "No, sir," Henry said. "Just me and my mother." He placed a hand on Henry's shoulder, but it didn't bring him much comfort. I almost felt bad for the poor boy. Mackenzie stood from the desk and went back to the far wall, more than happy to let me take over the rest of the interview. I went through the standard questions, getting a description of the killer and a retelling of the events from Henry's point of view. Like the other witnesses, he gave the exact same story. Killer had arrived with Mr. Ullers, dressed exactly the same. But where his account differed was in the killer's approach. "It was a big knife," Henry said, "and he held it up to my father's throat. Told us that if we didn't, then he would kill us all. And when he was finished with us, he would go after our families." "A big knife like a cleaver?" Harris asked. "The kind the butchers use?" "Yes, sir, I think so." Did the man have a gun? I asked. Henry shook his head. Not that I can recall, ma'am. You're sure? Well, he might have had one under his coat that we couldn't see. But if he had a gun, he never drew it. No, ma'am. Right. Thank you for your time, Henry. You can go now. I waited until the door was closed before turning to Harris. Let me guess, I said. You're thinking Henry will inherit the business now that his father's gone, aren't you? He becomes the new boss, increases the wages of the other shift managers, and they'll turn a profit. It's an interesting theory, but how does that killer fit into it? Harris stared at the wall, going to that special place in his head of which no person should ever bear witness. Oh, I loathe to think what kind of thoughts might swim around in there. I'm not sure what part the killer plays yet, he confessed. We should inspect the other bodies and crime scenes. Maybe this goes beyond petty workplace politics. Goes beyond it how? I asked. Well, I think our killer is trying to send a message, he explained. But at the moment, I'm not sure what that message is. Chapter 3. Sunday, October 4th, 1891. Inspector Harris Mackenzie. We're at the local undertaker's office, downstairs in the morgue. Cobblestone walls damp with perspiration, the smell of death and decay, combated by preservative chemicals. The undertaker was a quaint old man with a receding hairline. He wore round spectacles and a leather apron. His niece assisted with the two corpses, bringing them out on wheeled cooling boards and clipped ice packed beneath the perforated surface. Still, despite their attempts, the bodies were deteriorating at a rapid pace. The ice helped mitigate signs of bloating, but it did little to slow down the natural breakdown of tissue and cells. Discolored skin. Limp limbs now that rigor mortis had passed. A pervading odor like sulfur followed the two corpses. Bugs were beginning to fester in the wounds. Blowfly eggs had hatched into maggots. A natural consequence for murder victims. We tend to bury bodies sooner rather than later, but when the corpse was considered evidence, we held on to them for as long as possible. The funerals would certainly be closed casket. You're in luck, inspectors, the undertaker said. Another day or so, they would have been in the ground. Not to worry, though. We're as thorough as ever. We have plenty of photos to use for reference. My niece is quite the artist, too. She has sketches if you'd like them. We appreciate your prudence, sir, Inspector Darcy said. Always polite, always the professional. We'll gladly accept whatever you can offer. The undertaker nodded and sent his niece off to gather the materials. Meanwhile, he put on a pair of rubber gloves and tied a handkerchief dabbed with lavender oil around the lower half of his face. He offered us some as well, to keep the stink at bay. Inspector Darcy accepted. I refrained. Inspectors, allow me to introduce the first victim. The undertaker completely removed the sheet over one of the bodies then. Richard Howards, influential man from New York. I believe he was here for investment purposes. The man was 5'6", with more hair on his chest than on his head. He was plump around the midsection, and laceration carved his neck in the shape of a smile. The wound was deep enough to expose bone. Like Johnson Uller's, his ears, eyes, and tongue were removed. The depth and angle of the wound suggested the killer cut the victim's throat from behind, right to left, meaning they mostly feared their left hand. Was there anything else missing? I asked. The undertaker peered up at me through his spectacles, his brow furrowed. That's an interesting question, Inspector. As a matter of fact, teeth, toenails, and fingernails are gone. The victim's liver has been removed too, carved out with a serrated blade. Serrated? Or perhaps a sawback. The undertaker spoke gently with the soft wisp of an aged man. His hands shook, but they showed great care when tending to the bodies. Deft and succinct whenever they were mobile. The incision, which has since been stitched, was grotesque, done quickly. The killer's inexperienced? Inspector Darcy remarked. Not necessarily, I said. They've shown great aptitude with the blade thus far. Maybe their urgency was brought on by the possibility of being discovered. Or anxiety, she said. This was their first kill. I nodded in agreement. Perhaps they were worried about being caught and wanted to get away as soon as possible. But after my experience studying deranged minds, another thought occurred. Or maybe they were overly excited, unable to control themselves. The undertaker seemed appalled at the mere suggestion, but composed himself. I would say the culprit has some expertise in dissection. What kind of expertise? Inspector Darcy asked. The undertaker weighed this internally. More than the average person, but less than someone like myself. Oh, that's a broad range, I said. We could be looking at a butcher, hunter, medical student, hospital stewards, or anyone with fundamental experience in dissection. Including nurses, doctors, slaughtermen. Inspector Darcy looked at the undertaker. Or surgeons. He chuckled. You've caught me, inspectors. Right, shall we prepare the irons now? You're right-handed, aren't you? Darcy asked. That's true, but lest you forget, many are taught to favor their right hand, even if natural intuition tells them otherwise. Call these people ambidextrous, right-handed on both sides. True ambidextrous are a rare breed, I argued. Even those forced to learn with their right hand will still show more comfort with their left. I grabbed a scalpel from a nearby table and passed it to him. Perhaps you'd like to give us a demonstration. The undertaker laughed softly, but consented to the test. He went across the room to where Johnson Uller's corpse resided, still untouched since the crime scene. Any particular place you'd like me to start? The undertaker asked. Your normal process, please, Inspector Darcy said. As we watched the undertaker perform the primary procedure for an autopsy, Darcy carefully reached the revolver holstered on her left side beneath her jacket. I'd seen her draw the weapon numerous times. She showed little hesitation in arming herself, but firing the weapon was a different situation altogether. I would have reached for my own weapon, but I'd already dismissed the undertaker as a potential suspect. He harbored the necessary surgical training, more than necessary. However, his stature and frame didn't match the description given to us by the industry workers. Not to mention, he could hardly walk around without limping. As for his niece, that was the more probable suspect. While the wrong gender, she had a similar build as the masked killer. Her height differed from the estimation given to us by the witnesses, though. I had another test in mind before I could rightfully dismiss her. The undertaker finished and stepped back from the table. Darcy glanced at me. I moved forward, leaning close to inspect his work. The incisions made with your right hand are straighter and cleaner, I said. It requires more effort for you to use your left hand when making cuts. You apply more pressure and perform more slowly. Show more caution. Perhaps it's an act, the undertaker suggested. Maybe I'm trying to deceive you. I shot a look in Darcy's direction. She withdrew her hand from her jacket, letting it fall to her side. Is there a reason you want us to suspect you? He turned to answer. I reached into my pocket and removed the bottle of laudanum. Sir? I tossed the bottle across the table at him before he could respond. The undertaker caught it with his right hand at the last second and gripped it tightly. He began to laugh and rolled the bottle around in his palm. Very clever, Inspector. He held the bottle closer, reading the label. Now, that is interesting. What ails you, my boy? I believe you already know. He handed the bottle back to me, and I returned it to my pocket. The undertaker sauntered across the basement and retrieved a cup of tea from the counter. What gave me away? You've been very hospitable towards us, I said. But you've also been keeping a close eye on me ever since I walked through the door. The undertaker sipped from his tea and smiled. His eyes went to Darcy. My, oh my, he is perceptive. Don't indulge him too much, she said. He already has enough of an ego. I'll admit, the undertaker said. Chief Barris told me a little bit about you. All good, I imagine, I said. He tittered with childlike amusement. He said you were classified as mentally deranged, that I ought to keep you away from sharp objects, and never let you out of my sight, with or without your handler around. The undertaker's assessment was closer to accurate than inaccurate. The Board of Physicians had ruled me as mentally insane, not mentally deranged, but there was little nuance when it came to the field of psychology. Less so after William James published his book, The Principles of Psychology, with Henry Holt and company. It was an interesting read, although his theories on emotions, which argued that an emotion was the result of physical stimuli instead of the cause, needed further development. It wasn't completely false, but it left room for debate. They say you lack emotional response, the Undertaker continued. You show indifference to most, if not all, people. Struggle to reconcile their thoughts and feelings. They told you wrong then, I said. I can perfectly understand the thoughts and feelings of others. I struggle to relate to them, though. My disinclination toward morality and fascination with anatomy has sealed my fate. Have you ever killed? Not before becoming an inspector. Not even animals? He asked. I dissected plenty of specimens during my time at university, I said, but I never took a life, human or otherwise. Medical student? I trained in various programs. My ambition was always being larger than my means. Is that what led you to steal those corpses? He asked. Financial gain? He was poking and prodding, hoping to elicit a discernible reaction. Unfortunately, I show little when it comes to facial expressions, something that has afflicted me since birth. I'm beginning to suspect you've heard of me prior to Chief Burris's warning, I said. Perhaps, the Undertaker admitted. He gestured at Darcy with his cup. I don't think I've forgotten about you, young lady. I've heard my fair share about you as well, most involving your father. He sounds like a bright man. Darcy went taut, and when she responded, her voice was stiff. He was, sir. Very much so. Is it true what they say about him? About his dreams and ravings? If Darcy constricted any further, she would have snapped in half. I can't say for certain, sir. His mind deteriorated rapidly with age. Ah, yes, senile dementia. An inevitable fate that will take us all. He drank from his cup and set it on the counter. Or at the very least those of us lucky enough to live that long. He moved across the room to the second body then. Shall we get started with Thomas Banks now? The second victim was a land agent with similar injuries as the first. A carved throat bled dry. He was hung upside down and left tied to a post in the middle of a farmer's cornfield, a human scarecrow of sorts. His corpse was in a worse state than his predecessors, pecked and picked at by carrion crows, beaten by prolonged environmental exposure. Like the others, his ears, eyes, and tongue were removed. The Ozymandias message had been found written on a wax-enameled letter stored in the victim's mouth. Considering the letter wasn't found in the victim's stomach, suggested it was inserted post-mortem. When we were finished with the overview, the Undertaker led us upstairs to the office and parlour area. His niece had their reports and her drawings bound in a neat stack with twine. Darcy kept the Undertaker occupied while I spoke with the assistant. Although I couldn't help but notice that the Undertaker was careful to keep an eye on me at this time. I asked the assistant surgeon to retrieve a pencil. She did so with her right hand. When I asked her to write something down, she again performed the action with her right hand. Is there a reason you can't write this yourself? She said. Your uncle was advised not to give me any sharp objects, I told her. While a pencil might not be a scalpel, I assure you it can be applied in dangerous ways, and I'd rather not do anything to upset your uncle. I thought you didn't care about others, she said. His concern would provoke Inspector Darcy to act. I'd rather walk out of here than wind up in the basement alongside Johnson Ullers and Thomas Banks. I collected the bundle of reports and drawings then. I take it you've heard of me as well. Only what Chief Burris and the other officers were saying. Which was what, exactly? You're as mad as a hatter, she said, a pursuer of savage compulsions. Well, she was familiar with Lewis Carroll. Not exactly the pinnacle of literature, but it meant she could read. I wonder if she was an admirer of Percy Shelley. A learned woman with a propensity for operating on cadavers, I said. Those same people might deem you mad as well. They most certainly have already, but I ignore them and continue on. How long do you expect that approach to work in your favor? Optimistically speaking, till the rest of civilization catches up, she said. Realistically speaking, I asked, until someone with enough authority decides otherwise. Well, she seemed shrewd, but her cleverness could only save her for so long in a society like ours. One day, more likely sooner rather than later, she'd be forced to face reality. A similar situation could be applied to Inspector Darcy, I suppose. They were under close scrutiny, and the moment they proved more trouble than worth, they'd be cut loose from their positions, cast aside. I imagine it'll be a difficult burden when your uncle passes away, I said. She reeled back, struggling to hide her displeasure. I would think so, Inspector. Does it not upset you to consider the mortality of your loved ones? It upsets me knowing I'll have to purchase a suit for their funerals. Oh, you are a deplorable fellow. Yet the system entrusts me to help protect society. What does that tell you? She grinned. That maybe we ought to be less concerned with what women do and more concerned with what people like you do. Concern will only take you so far. And what do you suggest, Inspector? Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends. Then good men should look on and do nothing. She grimaced, unsure whether to be offended or amused. She was cautious about how she interacted with me, and if she believed one word could send me into an uncontrollable frenzy. Mentally insane did not always equate to dangerous or malicious, yet most failed to understand that due to public stigma. Are you saying I should protest then? She remarked glibly, that I'd become an activist and march down the streets while chanting about my rights. Well, I'm not telling you what to do, I said. I'm simply curious about what you might do. Are you testing me, Inspector? She didn't bother waiting for a response. Well, let me put your curiosities to rest then. I'll do what I've been doing for the last 6 years. She gestured to the room around us. Keep working, and hopefully others will come to understand it on their own. Oh, you put too much faith in others, if that's what you hope for. Chapter 4. Sunday, October 4th, 1891. Inspector Eleanor Darcy. Our accommodations were minimal, a flop house above a local tavern. The rooms were utilized mainly by escorts and their customers, cheap and easy for Project Inferno to afford. Most of the budget went to pay our wages. The agency was funded by private investors and a few public grants signed by President Harrison. The room offered us a single bed, a desk, and a sofa with stiff cushioning. As usual, I took the bed for myself, and Inspector Mackenzie was given the sofa. It would be more use holding our luggage and notes than him. Well, he only ever slept during train rides. Disquieting at first, but I'd long grown accustomed to it. In the beginning, I used to sleep with my revolver beside me, a knife too on some occasions, constantly worried he might try to attack me in the dead of night and escape. But Inspector Mackenzie was a well-trained dog, only ever dangerous when I sent him on a fox hunt. By the time we finished at the undertaker's office, collected our bags and crime scene reports from the police department, and got to our room, it was evening. We'd also made a quick stop at the local library for Inspector Mackenzie to purchase some books. That's all he ever seemed to spend his money on, well, that and, on occasion, food. The rest of our necessities, ammunition, medical services, travel fees, and sleeping arrangements were handled by the agency, either through a stipend or reimbursement. As I went about preparing supper for myself, 2 slices of buttered bread, dried beef, and beans, Inspector Mackenzie organized the notes we gathered from the police and the undertaker. He arranged the crime scenes into clear divisions. The first victim, Richard Howard's, throat slashed, killed at his private estate while his wife and children were away visiting relatives. The next group circulated around Thomas Banks, killed in an unknown location and transported to a farm on the outskirts of the city, hung from a post upended. And finally, Johnson Ullers, steel mill owner, killed at his own factory with the help of 4 shift managers and Uller's own son. Every victim had ears, eyes, and tongue removed. First 2 victims had their toenails, fingernails, and teeth removed too. Ozymandias was left behind at each scene. By the way, I advised Chief Burris to further question the man from the steel mill, I told Inspector Mackenzie. He said he would have them detained and interrogated about their involvement, specifically if their participation was of their own volition or not. It won't yield the results you're expecting, Mackenzie said. It's better than letting them run loose, especially if the papers hear about it. The court of public opinion. Far more damning than the judicial system. I was hoping that would satisfy him some way, but Harris was impossible to please. He only ever seemed at ease whenever he was isolated and doped up on laudanum, as if that were the only time he wasn't bound by his mental afflictions. Do you think it's possible those men were lying about the killer? I asked. Anything is possible. Fine. Do you think it's likely? He pondered this with severity. No. While their stories differed in various details, they all described the masked man as the same. That would require them to conceive a cover story before the police arrived. I don't think that they were clever enough to do something like that. How can you tell? During the interviews, the men were far too prone to their emotions. They lacked rational intuition, favored impulsivity over deliberation. You were rather hostile during those interviews, though. And they cracked under the pressure, he said. I think the masked man guided them through the murder of Johnson Ullers, but I don't think he forced their hand. The killer was the brains of the operation, and they were the muscle. Well, the fact that he abandoned them means he sees them as disposable, I said. It implies he's not worried about them revealing his identity. Either he trusts that they won't, or he knows that they can't. Which meant choosing Johnson Ullers as a target most likely wasn't a personal vendetta. In our past experience, repeat murderers initially acted out of desire. They killed for personal gain, financial usually, sometimes as revenge. Every murder that followed was less personal and more to fulfill an urge, sexual pleasure, excitement, or a need to establish dominance, often due to the fact that they were powerless in their everyday life. If the killers were capable of forward thinking, they knew to stay mobile, to seek victims away from their homes. It was harder to track a string of murders distant from one another. But our killer had targeted people all residing in the same city. They were either injudicious, which seemed less than likely considering the prudent manner in which they carried out their killings, or they didn't care about being caught. They believed capture was inevitable. This was especially evident in their choice of victims. A killer wanting to evade detection would have selected people who would have gone unnoticed by the rest of the public, escorts, vagrants, or the elderly, but instead they were killing prominent figures, wealthy, healthy, and heavily involved with society. I suspected Mackenzie had already considered this and refrained from bringing it up in fear that he might taunt me about how long it had taken me to make this connection. Did you speak with the chief about anything else? Mackenzie asked. I did, in fact. He's compiling a list of possible suspects based on education and occupational experience. Surgeons, doctors, butchers, and so on. He'll have officers patrolling the streets in search of suspicious figures. Well, that won't stop the killer. If anything, it'll make them more active. And you know how? Because if they wanted to remain anonymous, they wouldn't have left the Ozymandias message behind. They wouldn't willingly be supplying evidence for us to follow. You think they want us to catch them? Not us specifically, and I don't know if they want to be caught. I suspect they want attention, otherwise they wouldn't have made their murders such a grand display. Could be ritualistic. Doesn't align with any mythology or religion I'm familiar with. I scoffed at this. Maybe it's part of something you're not familiar with. He was quiet then, but I knew what he was thinking. And it was impossible because Inspector Mackenzie believed himself to be the smartest person in the room no matter who else was present. He liked to believe his investment in textbooks and literature offered him a transcendental comprehension of existence. As the chief counselor of Project Inferno put it, he mentally compares himself to God, omniscient, completely self-aware and without fault. Some may find this off-putting, others will think it charming. You cannot allow yourself to feel either. He's your dog. Scold him when he misbehaves and offer positive reinforcement when he follows orders. Well, I don't know if the counselor's assertion was entirely accurate. In my experience, Inspector Mackenzie had never compared himself to the divine, nor did he let on about superior intellect. However, most of his personal beliefs were kept locked behind those pursed lips, left for others to interpret or misconstrue. He only ever expressed his thoughts during an investigation, or when he was trying to manipulate someone. When it came to the latter, it was apparent. Most of his judgments were harsh, meant to invoke anger or sorrow from whoever he was trying to manipulate. The best defense in a conversation with him was to feign indifference. Conceal your emotions as best as possible. "The Undertaker mentioned your father," Mackenzie said. "I imagine that disturbed you in some way. Would you like to talk about it?" "No. Keep your attention on the assignment and nothing else," I ordered. "Understood, ma'am." He didn't really care. He was either asking because that's what he believed an average person would do, or he was attempting to get under my skin. An experiment of sorts to see how I processed information and would respond to emotional subject matter. A common trick he used during conversations with others, especially in interrogations. I picked up my meal while watching Mackenzie rotate between the indifferent crime scene reports. At some point, he retrieved one of the books he'd bought at the library, a copy of Percy Shelley's poems. He ripped out the page with the Ozymandias sonnet, underlined the passage found at the crime scenes, and nailed the page to the wall. "We should consider the surgeon's assistant as a possible suspect," Mackenzie suggested. "She has medical training and matches the physique of the killer." I lit a cigarette and tossed the match into a trash bin. "Maybe you failed to notice, but she's lacking in stature. Well, lifted boots could accommodate for the height difference." "Thomas Banks was fixed to a post upside down," I said. "Do you really believe she possesses the strength to do something like that?" He retreated from the conversation, realizing the absurdity of a willowy woman being able to achieve such a feat. Inspector Mackenzie wasn't a fool, even if it did seem that way at times, but he had narrowed sight. When he set his mind on something or someone, everything else became a blur. Being an inspector meant considering all possibilities. While I was quick to dismiss the surgeon's assistant, I still made a show of adding her name to the list before seeking out other potential suspects. "Keep digging through notes. See what else you can find for the suspect's profile," I said. "There's a medical school not far from the city. We can request records. Maybe there'll be someone that stands out." Mackenzie nodded. "We should also look into the personal and financial affairs of Johnson Ullers, Thomas Banks, and Richard Howards. They could be connected somehow." "Well, we already have connections. They were all white, middle-aged, and wealthy." A new thought suddenly occurred to me. What are the chances a city will want to blame immigration? Well, how many immigrants do you think are being accepted into medical schools? You heard the Undertaker. This isn't proficient medical knowledge. We could be looking for a hunter or butcher or even a slaughterman. He glanced over his shoulder at me. "And how many slaughtermen or hunters do you think have read Ozymandias? The killer is educated to some degree." "Well, keep looking," I said. "I'm going to catch some shut-eye." I stamped out my cigarette in what remained of my supper and carried the plate to the desk. I blew out the oil lamps, leaving Inspector Mackenzie to work in guttering candlelight. Then I removed my jacket, tie, and shoes before climbing onto the mattress. That night I had a strange dream about my father guiding me through dark tunnels. He was exactly as he was the last time I'd seen him. Stocky, bushy beard, round glasses, thick black hair streaked by grey. "This way, Evie," he'd said. "Through here." "Where are you leading me?" I asked. He held a finger to his lips, motioning for me to be quiet, and continued through the tunnels. The walls were bare stone, damp with moisture and draped in moss. Petrichor was in the air, the smell of mud and mildew. Scratched into one of the walls was the phrase, "Reality does not conform to the ideal, but confirms it." Further down the way was another message. "There is no truth, there is only perception." Whispers snaked through the tunnels, funneling around me, too many to distinguish. They were various pitches and inflections, young and old, man and woman. Some croaked, others were fragile, afraid. A few uttered warnings to stop and turn back. These voices were drowned out by several others telling me to move forwards. "You're getting close now," the voices said. "Just a little further." Lantern light pooled around my father, and despite his age and weight, he was steadily getting ahead of me. Shadows encroached. I hurried after him, but no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't catch up. All we see or seem is but a dream within a dream, my father said before disappearing into darkness. I became insane, with long intervals of horrible sanity. I was left alone to traverse those tunnels. My gun and holster were missing. I was barefoot, dressed only in a button-up and pants. Cold winds blew from ahead, sinking deep into my bones. My teeth began to chatter, and goosebumps prickled my skin. My toes became numb. "You're with him now," a voice said. I emerged from the tunnels into a forest. Leafless trees as far as the eye could see. Branches tangled together, roots jutting from the ground. Overhead, stars swirled in the night sky, becoming a vortex of incandescent lights. "He sees you now," a voice whispered in my right ear. "He who will eat the sun and the moon. His stomach is a black hole. He has no face, no heart. He exists in the spaces between time itself." I turned, but there was nobody. Another voice spoke into my left ear. Their words trickled through my ear canal like a drop of rainwater. "His form is the body of others, flesh grafted as one. His voice is their screams. The streets will flood, the mighty will perish, all shall bow to the divine judge." I stopped dead in my tracks. Ahead the treetops were draped with clothes. Trousers fluttered in the wind like a sail. Shirts were skewered by branches. Shoes stuffed into the hollows. Ears and tongues were nailed to the trunks. Teeth and fingernails were scattered on the ground around them. The air was rife with sweat, with a coppery tinge of blood. I could practically taste it. Through the trees I saw a clearing. A lone figure sat before a pyre. The flames piled high, and smoke wafted into the sky, fed into a black mass of clouds. The flames changed from red to blue to white to green before settling into a golden shade of yellow. I could hear chanting, foreign words, guttural, animalistic, like the snarl of a wolf. The figure rose and stood before the pyre with their hands lifted toward the sky. Thunder boomed, and with it came a downpour of blood. I awoke from this dream drenched in sweat and panting. Inspector Mackenzie sat on the windowsill, flipping through the files and smoking a cigarette. Our eyes met in the dark, but before either of us could speak, there came a knock at the door. I climbed out of bed and sauntered across the room. The barkeep from the tavern below greeted me. "Package, ma'am," he said. I rubbed my eyes and stifled a yawn. "From who?" "Couldn't say. Young lad. Benny Milson. He gave it to me a few minutes ago. Said he was paid to drop it off. Came with an envelope." He handed me the package and the letter. "We're not a post office, just so you know." I closed the door and turned. Inspector Mackenzie was already on his feet. We looked at each other. I set the envelope on the desk and opened the package. The contents were buried beneath shredded newspaper. I reached inside, and my hand wrapped around something cold. A glass jar filled with eyeballs and a liquid solution. I almost dropped it out of shock, but my instincts took hold. Carefully I set it on the desk and stepped back, gritting my teeth to keep from gagging. Inspector Mackenzie approached the jar with curious fascination. He turned the jar over in his hands, observing the outside. Then he removed the lid and sniffed. "Formaldehyde," he said. "A newer preservative. It's more popular in Germany, but as of recent, it's being adopted here in the States." "Did you see any at the undertaker's office?" "No," he said. "They relied on arsenic and ice to mitigate deterioration. More ice than arsenic, considering the amount of insects that infested the corpses." While he inspected the jar, I ripped open the envelope. A small slip of paper was inside, reading, "He sees you. Do you see him?" Along with the words, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." I tossed the envelope and letter on the desk. Inspector Mackenzie looked it over and frowned, not sure what to make of the message. "We should check in the local merchants and docks," I said. "See if any of them have been bringing in formaldehyde." With the McKinley tariffs, our killer might have smuggled it in through private shipping, he said. If it was brought in illegally, there wouldn't be official records. It's still a lead. We should look into it when morning comes. In the end, it didn't matter because, by later that day, we already had an answer and another corpse. Chapter 5. Monday, October 5th, 1891. Inspector Harris Mackenzie. Around 6 in the morning, there was another knock at the door. I was reviewing witness testimonies from the previous 2 crime scenes while Inspector Darcy looked through the financial accounts of John Ullers, the steel mill owner. Inspector Darcy answered the door. A pair of officers conversed with her in whispered voices, I suspect so that I wouldn't overhear the conversation. When they were finished speaking, Darcy closed the door and said, "There's been another crime scene. Let's move." I strapped on my shoulder holster and grabbed my jacket from the rack, making sure the weapon was concealed beneath. I was authorized to carry, but local law enforcement wasn't privy to this information. At least we didn't believe they were. Inspector Darcy thought it was in our best interest to keep that from them, considering that they were already dubious about my presence. She slipped on her boots, combed her hair, and stored our paperwork in a satchel bag. These papers legitimized our position within Project Inferno, and authorized our involvement with the police department. On the way out the door, I took my morning dose of laudanum. It calmed my thoughts, eased the tension in my body, lifted my regularly low spirits. Although the taste was bitter, I didn't mind. I'd been conditioned to associate that taste with silence, and silence is bliss. As Edgar Allan Poe once said, I have absolutely no pleasure in the stimulants in which I sometimes so madly indulge. It has not been in the pursuit of pleasure that I have periled my life and reputation and reason. It's been the desperate attempt to escape from torturing memories, from a sense of insupportable loneliness and a dread of some strange impending doom. We walked outside and climbed into a carriage. The 2 officers sat across from us, silent as the dead, heads bowed, but their eyes on me. My reputation was unforgiving, but I preferred it to fame or admiration. People are less inclined to interact with a man of dreadful standing. They could gawk all they wanted, so long as I didn't have to endure the displeasure of their thoughts and opinions. Inspector Darcy, however, was not quite as comfortable as I was. To break the silence, she asked the officers, "Have you ever heard of a boy by the name of Benny Milson?" The officers looked at each other. The one on the left answered, "He's my second cousin, ma'am." "Where does he live?" Did he do something wrong?" the officer asked. "Boy's not even 10 years old yet. Hard to imagine he's caused you any trouble." "He's not in any trouble," she said. "We just have a few questions about a package he delivered last night." After a little more convincing, the officer handed over an address and the names of his parents. We spent the rest of the carriage ride in silence. When we arrived at the crime scene, we were met by ashes and embers. The air was balmy and thick with smoke. Winds rolled off the sea, bringing in a brackish aroma. We were on the northeast side of the city, along the coast, where the fishmongers and shipping companies resided. The area was mostly docks and piers. There were a few vendor stands, but they'd been vacant during that time. Chief Burris greeted Inspector Darcy with a brusque wave. "Victims are Anna Campbell and her husband William. They owned the local marine merchant house and import-export firm. Handled most, if not all, shipping in town. Transport of people and goods." "Just the 2 victims?" Inspector Darcy asked. Burris nodded. As far as we can tell, but we're still wading through the ruins." The docks were scorched, and all surrounding warehouses were in shambles, including a small office building, most likely where the records and logs were housed. "Not much left of the bodies," Chief Burris continued. "Surgeon already came by to collect them. Ears, eyes, and tongue were removed before the bodies were burned." "Were they removed from both victims?" I asked. He hesitated and shook his head. "Just the wife, Anna. The husband was impaled through the sternum. Surgeon suspects he was dead before the fire. Anna, on the other hand, was killed by smoke inhalation." A breeze swept through. Ashes and embers swirled before being blown away. The fire company was still in the process of extinguishing the flames while public sanitation handled the cleanup. A mixture of official workers and volunteers, covered from head to toe in soot, coughing from exposure to smoke. "Did Anna Campbell own the docks?" I asked. The company was in her husband's name," Chief Burris said, "but he had inherited them from Anna's father." A common practice in marriage. Most of a woman's possessions were passed to their spouse. A law was sweeping through the country at the time trying to change that. It hadn't taken full effect yet, nor did it have much sway over traditional practices between husband and wife. Anna might have willingly signed over her possession of the company to him. That or her father had altered his will before death. Regardless, the docks and warehouses originally belonged to Anna. "Did the killer leave a message?" Inspector Darcy asked. Chief Burris pointed us in the right direction. We found Ozymandias inscribed on the wall of a nearby apartment building, written in blood. We investigated the scene, what remained, but after the fire there wasn't much to find other than cinders. When we left, it was almost 8 o'clock. We walked down the street, searching for a carriage to take us across town. "You think the formaldehyde was smuggled in by the Campbells?" Inspector Darcy asked. "Among other things, probably," I said. "Our killer is covering their tracks. Or maybe they're trying to highlight their tracks, make sure we follow them very carefully. Nothing about these murders has been subtle yet. No reason to think they'll introduce caution now." Inspector Darcy retrieved a pair of cigarettes, passing one to me. She lit them with a match and tossed it into the street. "We should give the jar of eyes to the undertaker and surgeon, see what they can make of it," she said. "There were more than 6 eyeballs inside. But we only have 3 victims, 4 if you include Anna Campbell, which means we either haven't discovered the other victims yet or maybe they're getting the eyeballs from somewhere else." She raked her fingers through her hair, pushing it back on her head. I wondered how many more assignments until we started seeing strands fall out. Maybe a few would turn grey. Stress had already taken its toll on her appearance, introducing bags beneath her eyes and wrinkles on her skin. It even seeped some of the joy from her voice. And believe it or not, there was a time when Inspector Darcy would laugh at some of my jokes, even the ones that bordered on cruelty. Since then, I'd seen more annoyance than humour. It didn't bother me. Humans are naturally disposed to negativity when surrounded by stresses like death, deceit, and administration. Or as Vincent de Gournay would call it, bureaucracy. "The case is getting out of hand fast," Inspector Darcy said. "We're losing control of the situation." "Well, that insinuates we had control to begin with," I said. She did not find that very amusing. To lighten her spirits and keep us going, I told her, "I may have found another lead to follow after we interrogate Benny Milson. I overheard some officers talking about the Campbell's company. It wasn't solely owned by them." "Who else?" "A private investor, local, someone by the name of George Barron. He has a few stakes in other businesses around the city, most notably a saloon on the south side of town." "Entrepreneur?" Darcy asked. "Gangster," I said. "The boss of a small crime syndicate. They're not exactly the Wiles gang, but the city is still in its infancy. Give it another 10 or 15 years, and we might be having a different conversation." "How does he operate?" "Private investments on the legal side. Otherwise, he runs extortion, escorts, and if we're on the right path—" "Smuggling," she finished. "We should stop in for a chat, see what you can tell us about the import-export trade." We finally found a carriage to take us across town. Darcy paid the driver, but before climbing in, I said, "We're being watched." "Yeah, I noticed." We looked back at a pair of officers lingering at the corner of the block. When they noticed us staring, they turned their attention elsewhere, pretending to be on patrol. Darcy waited until one of them glanced at us again and waved them over. "Is there a reason you're following us?" she asked. "Chief's orders," one of them said. "We're meant to keep an eye on you," said the other. "Can't have a madman running amok." "He's supervised by me," Darcy said. "You two should be patrolling the streets and watching for suspicious individuals." "Chief Burris, but the other officer cut in with, The Chief doesn't think you can keep your dog leashed. We've been on 11 different cases over the past year, she said. We haven't had an incident yet. Inspector Mackenzie will operate perfectly with or without your surveillance. Now, every second you waste watching us is another moment for the killer to strike again. I suggest you put your time to better use. Yeah, but the Chief... If Chief Burris has any complaints, he's more than welcome to speak to me. If he doesn't want to speak with me, he can get in touch with our superiors. Till then, we have work to do. And you do, too. We climbed into the carriage. Darcy slammed the door behind us. The driver whipped his reins, and we started down the street, listening to the clopping of the horse hooves against the ground. Do you honestly think that'll work? I asked her. Maybe for a little while, she said. I'm sure we'll see another patrol by tonight. I could see the despair on her face, the anger and irritation in her eyes. Her neck was tense, and she reminded me of a startled cat. A good partner in my position would have tried to comfort her, console her. Instead, we sat in silence, smoking our cigarettes, watching the coast fall away to clustered buildings. Shops on the bottom floors, apartments on top. Drying lines strung in the alleys between, wet clothes flapping against the breeze. Overcrowded, underfunded, and smelling of sewage. We had the carriage driver wait while we knocked on the Milson family's door. They lived on the second story of a crammed apartment building. Floorboards were mottled, the ceiling sagged against support beams. It was one bad storm away from coming down. A woman answered the door. May I help you? Inspector Darcy did the usual introduction, handing over our credentials, detailing our being there, asking if we could speak with their son, Benny. I don't know if we'll have the time for a conversation, inspectors, she said. He picked up another shift at the textile shop and was about to head out. Oh, we can walk and talk, I assured her. Don't worry, we'll wait here for him. The door closed, and a few minutes later Benny came out. He was dressed in ripped overalls with a greasy white shirt. He was barefoot and wore an oversized cap on his head. Benny, we're inspectors with the local police department, Darcy told him. We were hoping we could ask you a few questions. We followed him through the hallway and downstairs. The boy seemed nervous, but he agreed with a nod. Did you deliver a package late last night to the tavern owner down the street? Again he nodded. Sometimes Mr. Roth lets me deliver letters and things for extra pay, usually early in the morning or late at night when I ain't working at the factory. That package you delivered to the tavern owner, do you remember who gave it to you? The boy described the sender as a tall man with a curly moustache and green eyes. He was wearing a dark coat and a hat. After some deliberation, the best assumption we could make was it was a bowler hat. What color was his skin? I asked. Darker, sir. Darker how? You know, tan, like most folk round here. Well, probably part of the working class. Outside labor that exposed him to sunlight for prolonged periods. Considering the boy didn't recognize him meant he was either an outsider or a recent arrival. Did he have an accent? I asked. A what? The manner in which he spoke. Sounded no different than anyone else I talked to. His voice was deep and heavy. He talked slowly. Did he use words that you didn't recognize? He didn't speak much, sir, but whatever he said, I understood it. He wanted me to deliver a package was all. Gave me a fair price to do it, too. Darcy and I looked at each other. The sender was probably born in the States, maybe even local from a town in the surrounding area. At least we knew what to look for now. If you ever see this man again, find the nearest officer and tell him, Inspector Darcy said. If you can't find an officer, tell your parents. Yes, ma'am, Benny said. Is he a bad man? She hesitated to answer. The natural reaction from people was to protect children, to coddle them, keep them trapped within a globe of ignorance, shelter them from the harsh conditions of reality. So I was curious how Inspector Darcy would respond. After a few moments, she spoke. He's someone we'd like to talk to. If you see him, don't be scared. He won't hurt you. But don't go near him again, because he might be very sick. You want to get sick too, would you? The boy shook his head. No, ma'am. We sent the boy off to work and returned to our carriage. As we rode to the south side of the city, Darcy recorded the interview in her journal. "Hey, you lied to the kid," I said. "I didn't lie," she said. "I just told him what he needed to hear and left the rest unspoken." "You think our killer is sick?" She glanced up at me. "He's killed 4 people that we know of, removed their eyes, ears, and tongues. I think he's very sick." We continued south through the city. It was almost 11 o'clock by the time we arrived. A few people ambled about, but most were either at work or sleeping until the night shift. The buildings were more run down here. The road was dilapidated. If the west side were a slum, the south side was a gutter. "Are you sure this is where the saloon is?" Inspector Darcy asked. "South side rent is cheap and crime rates are higher," I said. "Police don't patrol the area much, and no one would think twice about what happens here. Perfect place for a syndicate to blossom until it legitimized." The saloon was the only building on the block that wasn't run down. It was bookended by an apothecary shop and a grocery mart. The inside of the saloon has hardwood floors, swept and polished. The walls were brick, fitted neatly together, adorned by black and white photos as well as framed paintings from overseas. The bartender was wiping down the counter with a rag. He looked up at us. "Can I help you folks?" The crowd was empty, save a few stragglers still passed out from last night's bender. Heads laid on the tables with half-empty glasses of scotch beside them. Flies circled over them as if they were corpses. "We're with the local police department," Darcy said. "Is George Barron in?" The bartender flexed his jaw and nodded. "Should be in the back, but, much appreciated, friend." Inspector Darcy walked straight past into the back hallway, and I followed her. There were 2 doors. One was labeled storage, and the other was at the end of the hallway and marked private. Inspector Darcy knocked on it. A few moments later, a large man answered. He was broad-shouldered, standing maybe 7 feet tall, and had a face that looked like it had been soaked in vinegar for too long. "George Barron?" Darcy asked. "We're inspectors working with the local police. We wanted to ask you a few questions about Anna and William Campbell." "Let 'em in," came a croaking voice from within the room. The giant of a man stepped aside, allowing us to walk past. Inside the office, an aged man sat behind a mahogany desk. Sagging skin, round belly, jowls that quivered with every word. He reminded me of an overripe bulldog dressed in a pinstripe suit with a humbug on his bald head. Sometimes Father Time blesses us. Sometimes he takes us behind the woodshed and beats us with a branch. Mr. Barron was treated to the latter. Inspector Darcy removed her jacket, revealing her holstered pistol. She hung her jacket on the back of a chair in front of the desk and took a seat. I remained at her side, receiving a dirty look from the giant bodyguard. "I heard about the fire at the docks," Mr. Barron said. "A dreadful, dreadful thing." "You seem real broken up about it," Darcy remarked. "Oh, I'm crying on the inside, officer." "Inspector?" "I didn't think Wormwood had any detectives." "Well, from out of state, assisting in the string of local murders." Mr. Barron cackled and offered us a drink. We both refused. He poured himself a large glass of scotch anyway. "Ah, those murders. Deranged," he said between sips. "Something wrong with this new generation, I tell you. Back in my day, this wouldn't have happened." "Well, the war certainly had an effect on people," Darcy said amicably. "Nearly tore this country apart, and we're still trying to put ourselves back together." He grumbled with disgust and shook her away. "Damn war never should have happened. This country used to be something. Now we got murder in the streets, damn tariffs and taxes and government looking to steal every penny you got. Hey, you hear about that Sherman Act?" "Sir, we're not here to discuss politics or the economy. We were hoping you might give us insight into some of the dealings you had with the Campbells."
Hope I'm not a suspect."
I looked over at him then. "Not yet." Barron didn't like that response, and his bodyguard inched closer until he stood behind me, a warning that if I didn't keep my mouth shut, I'd be removed. Inspector Darcy questioned him about the comings and goings of the business, but Mr. Barron claimed he had little involvement other than financial investment and returns. She asked if he kept any records about the cargo, but he was adamant that he didn't keep records, not even for his own endeavors. "Do you know if the Campbells were smuggling foreign exports?" Darcy asked.
"Foreign?" Mr. Barron spat. Everything they did was above board, Inspector. We're an American company, dealt solely with American products, God bless. For a man that doesn't keep records, you sure have a lot of filing cabinets. Inspector, unless you have any more questions for me, I suggest you leave. I have a lot of business to deal with, and of course, a lot of grieving to do for my dearly departed friends.
Of course. She rose from her chair and gestured for me to follow. Baron's bodyguard trailed behind us all the way to the exit. When we were outside, he lingered in the doorway for a moment and said,
Maybe you ought to keep your noses out of our business. Be in your best interests.
Then he turned and stalked off. You think the greybeard is telling us the truth? Darcy asked me.
I don't think that man can speak without telling a lie. And he's not very good at it either.
If he has any records, we need them. She pursed her lips and studied the outside of the building with a narrow stare. Mackenzie, I left my jacket in the office. Go fetch it for me. Her gaze was severe and demanding. Oh, and leave your weapon. I unholstered my revolver and handed it to her before heading into the saloon. The bartender chuckled. Back so soon? Go down below for another barrel, I told him while walking past. He came out from behind the bar. Hey, wait a minute now, you can't. I backhanded him across the face, and he dropped against the counter. I kicked the inside of his knee, and he fell to the ground, yelling. As I entered the back hallway, the office door opened. Baron's security stepped out. He swept back his jacket and reached for the revolver on his hip.
You've been told once already.
I struck him in the throat before he could finish. Then I kneed him in the crotch. He grunted and bent over, using the right wall to keep from collapsing. I brought my elbow down on his back and dropped to the ground with a dull thud. Taking the revolver from his holster, I emptied the bullets into my palm and pocketed them. I turned the revolver over in my hand, holding it by the barrel, and swung the butt against the side of his face. There was a sharp crack of bones, and he went out like a candle. A runnel of blood spilled from his mouth as he snored. A molar came out with it, yellow and rotted to the core. And I saved him a trip to the dentist. Tossing the revolver aside, I continued into the office. Baron and I looked at each other. His eyes flicked down to the letter opener on his desk. We lunged at the same time. He got to the knife first, and I grabbed him by the wrist, twisted his arm back around behind his back, and pressed against him, pinning him to the desktop. Pushing his arm a few more inches, the knife came loose and clattered to the ground. Baron growled through clenched teeth, and blood rushed to his face, making his eyes bulge in their sockets.
Remember anything about those records yet? I asked.
Yellow bastard, he yelled. Logbook is in the second drawer, right side.
Grab it, I said.
He reached with his other hand.
Wait, stop. I'll grab it.
He shoved his hand aside and opened the drawer. Inside, a revolver laid on a leather-bound book. I grabbed the revolver, cocked the hammer with my thumb, and pressed the barrel against his temple.
It's very clever of you, I said.
Is that actually the book I'm looking for? He groaned and shook his head. Bottom drawer. I slammed the butt of the revolver between his shoulder blades and shoved him aside. He fell on the floor, scrambling to get back on his feet. I shifted the barrel until it stared him in the face. He returned to the ground and waited.
You'll get yours, boy, he warned me. I'll make sure of that.
Mr. Baron, your business associates were murdered and burned, I said. I think you have better things to worry about. I grabbed the logbook and closed the drawers. Turning to Baron, I kicked him between the legs. He went supine and clutched his groin, crying out in pain. On my way out, I retrieved Darcy's jacket from the back of the chair. Chapter 6. Monday, October 5th, 1891. Inspector Eleanor Darcy. We spent a majority of the afternoon travelling. We first went to Richard Howard's private estate, where he'd been murdered. However, his wife refused us entry. We'd need a judge to sign off on a warrant, which was achievable, but it would take time. We might have been able to force our way inside, since it was still an active crime scene, but we would have needed the support of Chief Burris. After I'd scolded his officers earlier in the day, I didn't know if we'd get that support. Instead, we abandoned that scene and went to the farm where Thomas Banks's corpse was discovered. We walked the fields, hoping to stumble upon something, but too much time had passed, too many storms and windy days had come and gone for anything useful to be left. We spoke with the farmer, a man by the name of Russell Thornton. He was a sun-beaten man nearing his 40s, 2 kids and a wife. All of them were underfed, skin and bones. "Mr. Thornton, you're the owner of this farm, correct?" I'd asked after introductions were made. "Nope." Well, that caught Inspector Mackenzie's attention. "Pardon?" "Truth be told, I don't got a clue who owns the damn land at the moment. Government, maybe." "And who owned it before the government?" "Thomas Banks. We had a deal worked out. Land was in his name, and I was making monthly payments. Bastard charged an arm and a leg. Promised it was fertile soil. Then I'd been paid off in no time. But half the crops die by harvest season, and the other half ain't selling like they used to with these damn clowns running Congress." We were able to view a copy of the land deed from Mr. Thornton, as well as the contract establishing the monthly payments between Mr. Thornton and Thomas Banks. We interviewed the family about the morning they discovered Thomas Banks's body. Other than finding the body, they hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious. On the carriage ride back to town, I reviewed the logbook Mackenzie had acquired from George Barron. I didn't know the specifics of how he'd obtained it, but if Mackenzie's reddened knuckles were any indication, it was better if I didn't know. I could feign ignorance if it came back to bite us in the ass. "Oh, you were right," I said. "About what?" he asked. "2 things. Johnson Ullers left everything to his wife and son, Henry. I'd read about it earlier but forgot to tell you." "And the other thing?" he asked. "The Campbells were working with George Barron to smuggle in foreign goods. The formaldehyde came from Germany, along with various liquors, construction materials, cigars made in Berlin, and some other odds and ends. According to the logs, everything was sold at 3 times the normal price." "Sold here or outside the city?" "Both. Booze and cigars stayed in town. The rest was transported via traveling merchants or by train." "What about the formaldehyde?" "That was sold to some undertakers and medical schools outside the city, but there are a few inconsistencies in the records. Prices not matching the amount of cargo, meaning either got lost, stolen, or someone in Barron's gang was running a side operation with his smuggled goods. Any chance that logbook has a full staff list of Mr. Barron's employees?" "Unfortunately, no." I closed the logbook and stored it in my satchel bag. I stared out the window, watching the countryside pass. Trees gradually disappeared in place of houses and shacks. Dirt roads became cobblestone. "Did you read that contract?" I asked. Banks was overcharging Mr. Thornton, almost double what he originally paid for the land. "Well, he flipped it for a profit," Mackenzie said, "and so the killer flipped him in death. Hung him upside down from a post on the same land. Yeah, a murderer with a sense of irony. Or maybe a vigilante. Well, vigilante depends on your view of justice." I felt a sense of guilt for thinking it, but our victims weren't exactly victims, well, not completely. I don't know if they deserved death or mutilation, but they weren't sweethearts either. They'd acted in a way that would earn them enemies, and they knew it. Johnson Ullers overworked his employees, paid them low wages, and had them on 6, sometimes 7 days a week. "Yeah, he's killed at his factory by his own employees and son," Mackenzie finished. "Left there to rot, hung from a trolley hook." Our carriage came to a stop downtown. Mackenzie and I took our investigation to the streets, knocking on doors and speaking with locals. We had a list of slaughtermen, butchers, and a few others with experience in dissection or carving, including a few veterans from the Civil War. While we followed the sidewalk, wading through crowds of hungry people, I said to Mackenzie, "Well, the Campbells smuggle in foreign products and sell them at 3 times their normal price. They use George Barron to eliminate and strong-arm the rest of the competition until they survive. Only them." "Well, the Campbells are killed at their docks," Mackenzie concluded. "Anna is forced to watch her family's legacy burn before the fire consumes her." Well, the butchers we talked to didn't match the description from the man at the steel mill or Benny Milson. Some spoke in heavy voices and were tall, but they had witnesses to corroborate their alibis for the time of the murders. None owned a bowler hat. They could barely afford their rent. They didn't have enough to purchase dandy accessories.
We visited a slaughterhouse in the northwest to speak with the employees. The manager wasn't happy about us disrupting the workday, but within a few hours we were able to sift through at least 25 different men. Well, they work 16 hours a day, if not more, I told Mackenzie. And most of them have families. They don't have time to go around killing, much less in such a methodical way. We need to acquire records from the medical school up north, he said. I sent a telegram, still waiting for a response. After the slaughterhouse, it was late in the evening. We decided to call it a day and head back to our room to review our notes. As we walked, I thought back to the photos and reports about Richard Howards, the first victim. New York businessman known for being cutthroat and heartless. So the killer cuts his throat and takes his heart. Hey, why the eyes, ears, and tongues? I asked. Mackenzie shook his head and downed a dose of laudanum. For the first time since we started working together, he seemed as frustrated as me. Hey, how's the killer choosing their targets? I asked. Well, they're targeting members of the upper class, he said, which casts a broad net. We could have Chief Burris increase patrols on the north side. More eyes means we'll be more likely to catch the killer. That'll go over well with the rest of the city, I said. Police only protect you if you're rich. The common folk will be in an uproar over that. He seemed less concerned than me about that eventuality. Well, maybe it's not just wealth, he suggested. Maybe they're connected another way. Could have been involved in a business deal. If the victims were all involved in a deal together, it hasn't been noted in any of their logs. We could always try talking to George Barron again. If the Campbells were the last victims, then it stands to reason George could be next. I knew he was right. We'd just gotten back to the tavern. More than anything, I wanted to lie on the bed and try to catch a few hours of sleep. I'd gotten maybe 5 hours the night before, and because of my nightmare, it wasn't what I would call refreshing. Hey, I need to eat, I said. Let's grab a meal first and head over after. Oh, you stay and eat, he said. I'll go over to the saloon now. I scoffed. You're mad if you think I'm letting you wander the streets alone. Still don't trust me? I trust you to stay focused on the case, but if any of Chief Burris's men see you out and about without me, forget about it. We entered the tavern and stopped at the front counter. They were serving steamed potatoes, baked beans, and boiled mutton shanks. I ordered a plate and ate while Mackenzie flipped through Barron's logbook. The potatoes were bland, the beans were burned, and the mutton was heavily seasoned with salt and black pepper. More fat than meat, and whatever meat there was had been tough as a nut. Why Ozymandias? I asked between bites. Mackenzie didn't bother looking up from the logbook. Well, the sonnet is about a traveler who encounters a statue with the inscription, "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." It's arrogant, ignorant to the indifferent nature of time and Mother Nature. He flipped to the next page in the logbook. It's a reflection of humanity's neglect for the way that civilizations will rise and fall on a whim. So the killer believes the city has fallen, and they're going after those responsible, I said. Whether we think it or not, he sees himself as a vigilante, a watchman in the night. Mackenzie closed the logbook and returned it to my saddlebag. He retrieved my carton of cigarettes and lit one. Or maybe the killer sees the city as a lost cause and wants to bring about its downfall by targeting its most prominent citizens, a way to topple the system. Well, maybe you haven't noticed, but the city seems to operate just fine without them. Well, perhaps that's what the killer's trying to get at, he said. They're trying to show the rest of the population how inconsequential these people truly are. Well, I don't think anyone but us is listening. He found this bitterly amusing. Well, that's humanity for you. Too concerned with their own lives to see anything else. You could beat their neighbors to death with a club, and they wouldn't think twice so long as you didn't target them or their family. His words left a sour taste in my mouth, worse than the food. Hey, take another dose of laudanum. Your melancholia is showing. I finished my food and paid. Before we could retreat to our room, though, an officer came into the tavern to fetch us. "Another crime scene's been discovered," he said. "Outskirts of town. I'm supposed to bring you immediately." "Who's the victim?" I asked. Not allowed to say, Inspector. We're supposed to show more discretion from here on out. Mayor's orders. We grabbed our things and rode a carriage outside of town. Past the farms and prairie fields to a festering of trees in the west. The moment we arrived, a deep chill settled over me. My heart stopped dead in my chest. Ahead, amongst a flurry of officers, was a pile of burned corpses, 5 in total. The trees around them were adorned with several tongues and ears. Teeth were scattered across the ground, fingernails and toenails too. The surgeon and the undertaker worked quickly to prepare the bodies for transportation, while officers snapped photos of the crime scene. It seemed they were more concerned with cleanup than investigation. "Inspectors," Chief Burris greeted curtly, "this is becoming a catastrophe. Do you have anything of worth?" "This case was originally yours, Chief," Inspector Mackenzie said. "You should try to keep that in mind." The chief grabbed him by the collar and pulled him close. The base of his neck flushed red, his lips twisted against a snarl. "You best watch your tone with me, Mutt. Don't know how they handle things where you come from, but round here, we show our elders with a little damn respect. We ought to have you arrested as a suspect. Lord knows you're mad enough to have done it." Inspector Mackenzie carefully wrapped his hands around the chief's hands. He leaned close and whispered, "I was 100 miles away when the first body was discovered. You'd be wasting your time and ours." He pried the chief's hands away and twisted them at the wrists until they threatened to snap. The chief refrained from yelling, but his body reacted on its own, knees slowly bending against the pressure, teeth clenched to keep his whimpers constrained. "Release him," I ordered. Mackenzie did as he was bid and took a step back. The chief returned to his full height and massaged the stiffness from his wrists. We had a wild look in his eyes, and for a moment I thought he might draw his revolver and execute Mackenzie. If he did, there was nothing I could legally do to stop him. "Chief Burris, are these the inspectors you were telling me about?" A portly man hobbled from the mass of officers. He was dressed in a fine suit, wearing a bowler hat and glasses. He stuck his hand out for me to shake. "Lucas Wright, Mayor of Wormwood. How do you do?" "Pleasure, sir," I said, feigning respect. "Inspector Eleanor Darcy. This is my partner, Inspector Harris Mackenzie." The mayor looked Mackenzie up and down. He snickered. "You're the infamous lunatic I've heard about. Not quite what I expected." "I wish I could return the courtesy," Mackenzie said. "But so far I haven't heard a thing about you, Mayor." Oh, the muscles in my neck tensed. "Mackenzie, walk the scene. See what you can find." "Yes, ma'am." The mayor watched him walk off with a smile. "Fascinating. A woman controlling a madman. These are strange times." He shook his head in disbelief. "Now tell me, Inspector, how'd you do it? How have you seduced him?" Anger bubbled in my throat, and I swallowed it. "I'm afraid, Mayor, Inspector Mackenzie can't be seduced. He's only attracted to his equals, and as far as we're aware, he doesn't see anyone as his equal." "Then how'd you keep him on a leash?" "Inspector Mackenzie either follows my orders or he'll be put in the ground. If not the ground, then in an asylum, which he considers a far worse fate." The mayor frowned. He'd rather die than receive treatment for his ailments. "He finds asylums to be monotonous and cruel," I explained. "Death, to him, is a more peaceful alternative." The mayor didn't know how to respond. Chief Burris took over the conversation after that. The bodies had been identified as the witnesses from the steel mill, 4 shift managers and Johnson Uller's son. "No wounds to indicate manner of death," he said, "but they were treated to the same cruelty as the rest. Ears, eyes, and tongues removed. Then they were stacked on top of one another and burned." "Did your patrol see anything?" I asked. "Nothing was reported. Looks like the fire took place earlier in the morning, around the same time the docks burned." "It was a good cover. There was enough smoke that no one would have noticed a stack coming from the west, especially not with everyone's attention on putting out the dock fire." "I had officers speak with the victims' families," the chief said. Spouses reported that they'd all left their homes around the same time for a meeting. Didn't say with who or where it was.
He then led me across the field to a pair of men guarded by officers.
Fur trappers came across the scene.
The fur trappers were 2 men, lean and tall. One was clean-shaven, the other was bearded. Both had long hair and wore tattered clothing, heavy boots for traversing muddy terrain, a pair of rifles slung over their shoulders. The chief gestured to the bearded man.
"This is Roger Young. Lil Raj, we call him."
He turned toward the other man and said,
"This is,
Wallace Green, sir."
"Right, of course. Forgive me. My mind's elsewhere right now."
The mayor called the chief over, leaving me alone with the witnesses. I removed my ledger from the satchel bag and began the interview. Now, according to them, they'd been out checking and setting traps for the local game. Roger Young, Lil Raj, noticed a strange smell. They wandered through the forest for about 20 minutes before they finally discovered the 5 burned men. Lil Raj stayed with the bodies while Wallace Green rode into town to alert the police. "How often were you 2 in this area?" I asked.
"Every other day, I'd say," Wallace responded. "We don't get as much game as we used to, not since the town expanded. Sometimes we might wait a few days to check the traps, especially if the weather's harsh."
"Did you notice anything suspicious or out of place when you first arrived?"
Lil Raj snorted. "Well, other than a pile of bodies and tongues and ears?"
"Yes," I said. "Other than that."
I can't say I noticed anything."
I turned to Wallace. He shook his head and said,
"No, ma'am, but I can't say I was looking for anything suspicious at the time. Just trying to keep my dinner down."
"Were you familiar with any of the victims?" I asked.
"Seen them around, maybe," Lil Raj said. "Whenever we go into town to sell to the butchers."
I asked them a few more questions about the nature of their work, and then I collected their home addresses in case I needed to speak with them again. Lil Raj lived on a ranch with his grandfather and some helping hands. Wallace lived in an apartment on the south side. After that, they were released. On their way out, Lil Raj looked at the dead bodies and sneered. Wallace performed the sign of the cross and bowed his head to the dead men.
"We are but dust and shadows."
I looked across the way at Inspector Mackenzie. He crouched low to the ground, sniffing. He glanced over at me and said,
"We'll need shovels."
Chapter 7. Monday, October 5th, 1891. Inspector Harris Mackenzie. By the time the officers were finished digging, 6 new bodies had been revealed, previously buried in a circle around the 5 burned steel mill workers. The new corpses had been buried with their belongings, including satchel bags, clothes, and money. Each one was also left with a wax-protected slip of paper identifying them. The corpses were well preserved and stank of exuberant formaldehyde, as well as creosote, turpentine, and dried lavender. 3 of the corpses were women in lavish dresses and ostentatious hats. According to the tags left with their bodies, they were Minnie Davis, Emma Taylor, and Ruth Baker. The other 3 corpses were adult men wearing expensive suits. 2 of them wore bowler hats. The third was without. The tags listed them as Jack Nally, Franklin Waldeck, and Lloyd Bauer.
The women were locals," Chief Burris said. "Working girls at George Barron's saloon."
"And the men?" Inspector Darcy asked. "Do you recognize them?"
"I do," said Mayor Wright. "These men came into town about maybe a month and a half ago, here on business. I'd met with them for a drink at Barron's saloon. They stayed for a few days and then departed for Lemoyne, another city about an hour ride from here." "Well, looks like they never made it,"
I muttered. According to the surgeon, the victims had been gunned down with rifles and revolvers. The men had their ears, eyes, and tongues removed. The women kept these parts, but had their lips stitched shut.
"Oh, there's something else," the undertaker said.
"Henry Ullers and the 4 other men. It looks like their genitalia was removed before they were incinerated." Some of the officers winced and moaned at this. The chief smothered his face in his handkerchief, and the mayor whispered a prayer beneath his breath.
We collected the victims' satchel bags and allowed the undertaker to load their corpses onto a wagon for transport. Within an hour, the crime scene was cleared of everyone other than us. "I hope you didn't plan on sleeping tonight," Inspector Darcy said. "We have a lot more paperwork to look through." "Well, we can start on the carriage ride back to town," I said. "When we get back, we should go see George Barron." "Oh, we will," she promised. "But first, I want to check something." The inspector led me deeper into the woods, through the trees to a cave opening. Within was darkness. "What's this?" I asked. "I saw it in my dream," she said, using a match to light the lantern she'd borrowed from one of the officers. "Come on." We walked inside, traversing a narrow corridor of jagged stone. The walls were covered by moss and lichen. The ground was a mixture of dirt and rock. Dew dripped from overhead. Eventually we came upon a message scratched into the wall. "Reality does not conform to the ideal, but confirms it." Further down the way was another passage. "There is no truth. There is only perception." "Gustave Flaubert," I said. "French novelist." "I had a feeling you might recognize it," she said. "Right, let's keep going. I want to see where this ends." The tunnel opened into an isolated chamber. The air was crisp and stagnant, rife with the must of wet soil and sulphuric stink of limestone. Dust hung, scattered, redolent of a late-night snowfall. The lantern light sent shadows swirling around our feet. 7 falcon heads, taxidermied, hung from the ceiling, wrapped with twine. Snake corpses littered the ground. Inspector Darcy moved along the wall. It curved in a conical fashion. She stopped and lifted the lantern, illuminating another phrase carved into the rocks. "Omnes una manet nox." "More Flaubert?" she asked. "It's Latin," I said. "Means one night awaits us all." "You know Latin?" "No, but I know Horace." We walked to the opposite wall, finding another phrase. "Semper avarus egit," I read aloud. "The greedy man is always in need." At the back wall we found a painting, crude but decipherable. It was meant to represent the sky. The horizon was colored a lapis purple shade with silvery dots and streaks as stars. At the center of the sketched sky was a large golden eye with a spiral pattern for the pupil. Above the eye were the words, "Ignorance is a folly," and beneath it were the words, "Sleep is for those who wish to live in a dream." Inspector Darcy turned toward the entrance and raised the lantern high. Above the opening was a familiar phrase. "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." She lowered the lantern. Light cast across the floor, reflecting against something. Darcy moved closer and knelt. There were 6 tin-plated cups on the ground. She retrieved one, peered inside, and tossed it to me. I caught it and held the cup beneath my nose. Bitter, somewhat akin to almonds, mixed with liquor, whiskey or scotch. I didn't have much familiarity with most spirits. Cyanide. Inspector Darcy frowned. Cyanide was one of the products listed in the logbook, wasn't it? Smuggled over from Germany with the cigars and formaldehyde. She rose to her full height, and the undertaker didn't find any noticeable wounds on our 5 steel mill workers. "Hey, we should get back to town. Something about this place doesn't feel right." She laughed. "Never knew you to be superstitious." We followed the tunnels back to the forest, and from there took a carriage into the city. During the ride, we divided the satchel bags from our 3 businessmen. The carriage jostled the overhead lantern from side to side, making it difficult to read, but we endured. Outside, thunder clapped from far away. Not long after, it started to rain. A light mist that began to come down like bullets, and the horses started to whine when the lightning came. "Hey, this dream you had about the cave," I asked while flipping through Jack Nally's journal. "Sounds like the ones your father used to have." Inspector Darcy glanced up from Franklin Waldick's journal and glared at me. Her lips were pursed tight, refusing to comment. You've had similar dreams in the past, I continued, during our other assignments.
What makes you think that?
You talk in your sleep.
She mumbled a few choice words under her breath before saying, I'm not like you, Harris.
Like me?
Insane. She didn't mean it as an insult, purely factional. Still, I couldn't help but laugh.
Sanity is a subjective matter, don't you think?
Not in your case. Now be quiet and keep reading. By the time we reached Barron's saloon on the south side, Inspector Darcy had discovered that Franklin Waldeck was a banker from New York. He'd come to town with Lloyd Bower, one of the 3 men we'd discovered buried in the woods. Lloyd was a lawyer visiting Wormwood to handle a life insurance claim. He brought Jack Nally and Franklin Waldeck at the behest of Richard Howard's. Well, I guess who Franklin Waldeck had a meeting with during his stay, she asked. Anna Campbell, her husband, and George Barron. He wanted to connect them with some of his New York associates.
Other gangsters, I'd wager, I said.
What'd you find out about Nally?
He had a few meetings, one with Mayor Wright. Also writes often about his affair with Minnie Davis, one of the escorts. He was planning to divorce his wife upon his return to New York and marry Minnie instead. Seemed all of the men had taken lovers during their stay.
So what? They killed by association?
Our killer sees them dealing with immoral figures, condemns them like the rest. So, still think this is the work of a vigilante?
A shadow fell across her face. Shame showed in her eyes. Inspector Darcy wasn't one for crying, but she avidly indulged her guilt. Her humanity was endearing to others, but to me it was a burden. A good inspector can't be bogged down by their emotions.
The killer's perspective of innocence and guilt is inconsequential, I said. Any participation in the downfall of their city is punishable by death. No half measures, no hesitation, no other verdict. It's absolute, unflinching.
If they're really targeting anyone involved, they'll end up going after everyone in town.
Aside from themselves, they don't recognize their killings as immoral. To them, it's a necessary countermeasure, a way to combat the corruption and degradation of society.
The carriage came to a stop. We departed and went into the saloon. It was a lively crowd. Piano music filled the air, laughter and chatter too. The townspeople couldn't be less concerned about the killer living amongst them. They didn't mourn the dead nor acknowledge them. The world always keeps spinning, no matter who dies. The bartender had a black and purple welt on his cheek, and when he saw us, he grabbed the nearest knife.
Hey, you two ain't allowed around here no more.
Look, we just need to speak with Mr. Barron, Inspector Darcy said. He could be in danger. The bartender lowered his knife.
Well, he ain't here. Where is he?
At his house. He's packing up, going on a little vacation. Says someone's coming after him. So, Mr. Barron had actually taken my advice. It's always amusing when people listen to me, knowing that despite their perspective on my mental state, I could still persuade them. Where's Mr. Barron live? Darcy asked.
I'm not sure.
I should say, in fact, maybe I ought to send for Chief Burris. Tell him about how you came in here and... You can answer me, or my partner can ask you, Darcy interjected. You have 10 seconds to make a decision, or we'll make one for you. The bartender looked back and forth between us, and the knife in his hand wavered. In the end, he slammed it on the counter and gave us an address, an estate on the north side. That came with a little surprise. We returned to the carriage and rode uptown. Inspector Darcy collected all of our newfound evidence into a satchel bag. Meanwhile, I reviewed Jack Nally's journal further, discovering a connection between him and Thomas Banks, mainly seeking out land for further business ventures. Jack Nally had also met with the Johnson Ullers about establishing a tobacco production plant together, in which they would use land bought from Thomas Banks for construction and crops. When I told Inspector Darcy about this, she laughed. 3 friends of Richard Howard's come to town and seek out some of the most influential figures of Wormwood. All 3 are killed. Then one by one, their associates are killed. We had one journal left now, that of Lloyd Bower, the lawyer who'd come to Wormwood to manage an insurance claim.
Yet we had arrived at Mr. Barron's private estate before we could review it. The estate was a large colonial building at the very edge of town, not 3 blocks from the rest of the city. Once probably a plantation with sprawling fields, the building remained relatively the same. Pillars and grand staircases and a wraparound deck on both the ground floor and first floor. The yard itself had been reduced, a sacrifice made, I imagined, when the once small farming community developed from rural to urban. We stepped out of the carriage and climbed the driveway to the front door. Inspector Darcy knocked. There was no answer. After a few more seconds, she knocked again. No answer. "Is he ignoring us? Or did he already leave?" she muttered. Annoyed, she rubbed at her brow and said, "Inspector Mackenzie, did you hear someone within crying out for help?" It was only silence. I believe so, ma'am." "Yeah, that's what I heard, too." She tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge, so she reeled back and kicked near the handle. The door jolted in its frame, so she kicked a second time. It sprang open, sending chunks of wood skittering across the floor. The inside was outfitted with an abundance of furniture, paintings and souvenirs, both foreign and domestic. The entrance led immediately to a grand staircase of polished wood. The air smelled of liquor and firewood, and the house was dark and quiet. Inspector Darcy and I made eye contact. We drew our weapons and started ahead. She searched and cleared the right wing of the building, and I did the same for the left. We reconvened at the bottom of the staircase, neither having found any sign of a disturbance, nor any sign of Mr. Barron. When we got to the first floor, we were about to divide and conquer, but then we heard the grunting. Inspector Darcy took lead. We followed the sounds through a hallway to the master bedroom. Upon entry, we found George Barron with his wrists and ankles bound to a chair. Standing over him was a masked figure, a few inches taller than myself. Broad-shouldered, lean about the torso, wearing a dark overcoat and bowler hat. The masked man held a sawback butcher's knife to Barron's neck. We aimed with our revolvers, but neither of us had a clean shot with Mr. Barron in the way. This was more of a problem for Inspector Darcy than myself. If she'd demanded that I open fire, I would have been obligated to carry out my orders regardless of who was in the way. However, you can always count on Inspector Darcy to take the humanitarian approach. If there's a possibility for a life to be spared, she won't hesitate. No matter who that person is, whether they be a gangster or a repeat murderer. "Drop your weapon and step away from the man," Inspector Darcy said. "If you refuse to comply, we'll be forced to open fire." The masked man's eyes roved over us. Perhaps it was the lightning, or perhaps my state of mind at the time, but I could have sworn that his eyes were pitch black, pools of oil. His only response was a soft growl, like a wild wolf preparing to lunge at its prey. He jammed the knife into Barron's stomach and jerked it to the side, slicing along it. Inspector Darcy fired twice. The first bullet whistled past the killer's head and struck the wall behind him. The second bullet grazed his shoulder. The killer turned and sprinted toward the nearest window, leaping through it to the outside deck. He collided with the outer railing, but found his footing quick and ran. "Hey, check on Barron," Inspector Darcy ordered. "I'm going after the suspect." Well, she was gone before I could respond, climbing through the shattered window onto the first floor deck. She ran to the right, her footsteps gradually fading away. I walked round to the front of Mr. Barron. The knife was lodged deep into his right side, and a gash stretched from the center of his abdomen to his flank. He was bleeding profusely, internal and external hemorrhaging, perforated organs. "Red, you've been injured," he said, "quite severely by the looks of it." His response was a mixture of choking and gasping. Through these guttural sounds, I believe he was pleading with me to save him. Or maybe it was for forgiveness. Not everybody gets final words. "I, nor anyone on this planet, could help you," I told him. "You're going to die, Mr. Barron." With that, George Barron went limp, breathing his last breath. His body would slowly shut down and decay. His bowels would eventually release. Within a few hours, rigor mortis would stiffen his muscles. When that would pass, and all that would remain was a squishy husk of flesh and organs. All this brought neither joy nor displeasure, but rather a curious fascination. The natural breakdown of organic elements, a reminder that even humans must succumb to time and nature. I climbed through the broken window and followed the deck to the right side of the building. Down below, the masked man ran across the yard toward town. Inspector Darcy wasn't far behind. Her muzzle flashed and bullets struck the ground around the killer's feet. The killer was getting further and further away. I aligned the iron sights of my revolver with him. My finger wrapped around the trigger. In the end, I assumed he was too far for me to hit, and if I were to fire, I'd either miss or maybe hit Inspector Darcy. Holstering my revolver, I continued along the deck until I found a gutter system I could use to descend. I dropped onto the side yard and chased after the others. The killer had slipped through an alleyway into town. Inspector Darcy was closing the distance between them, but if my count was correct, all 6 of her bullets were spent. By the time I reached the city, I'd lost sight of both. I searched the area, noticing a steady trail of blood left behind from the killer's shoulder wound. I followed the trail through several alleyways, twisting and turning at random intervals. The killer didn't know where they were going. They simply wanted to evade capture. Surprising for a killer so grandiose and public with their previous affairs. The entire time I'd suspected they didn't care about their capture, but perhaps I was wrong. Maybe they wanted to be captured at the right moment, after they had murdered everyone they deemed immoral. When I eventually caught up to Inspector Darcy, she was on the ground at the killer's feet. Her firearm was cast aside. The killer had beaten her black and blue, and upon my arrival had one knee planted on her chest with both hands wrapped around her throat, pressing down. I stopped at the corner of a building, lingering behind it, watching Inspector Darcy's face turn from red to a bluish hue. She kicked her feet like a child in the midst of a tantrum, and her fists flailed against the assailant, desperately trying to break his hold on her. It truly was a fascinating sight to witness. My own partner in the throes of a battle for her life, knowing that in a matter of minutes she would be gone from this world. All I had to do was lift my weapon and fire, or I could continue to watch and see what the killer would do next, to see what Darcy would do next. Come now, I thought. Do something interesting. Will you go for her eyes? Will you try to cut out her heart? What do your instincts tell you to do next? Surprisingly, the killer leaned in close and whispered in her ear. When he was finished speaking, he removed himself from Inspector Darcy. She gasped for air and clawed at the ground, trying to crawl toward her weapon. The killer slammed his boot down on her back, pinning her in place. He reached beneath his jacket and produced a hunting knife, wooden handle, long blade, straight edge. He stabbed it in her back. Inspector Darcy screamed at the top of her lungs. I expected our infamous murderer to be a little more creative than that. Disappointed, I cocked the hammer of my revolver. It clicked, and the killer looked up at me. He scurried off like a frightened animal. I aimed and fired. The bullet struck them between the shoulder blades, throwing them off balance. The killer slammed against the wall and staggered forward, slipping into another alleyway. With my weapon fixed on this alleyway, I approached Darcy. She writhed on the ground, still going after her firearm, while the exertion would only intensify her blood loss. How do you wish for me to proceed, Inspector? I asked. Should I pursue the suspect, or should I save your life? Darcy began to rise, yelling through gritted teeth the entire time. She was almost at her full height before she collapsed, unconscious by the time she hit the ground. I decided my next steps based on how I thought she would have answered, and I have no regrets about my actions. Chapter 8. Tuesday, October 6th, 1891. Inspector Eleanor Darcy. There was only darkness and pain. It felt as if my body were ablaze, as if fire had corroded every sinew, every tissue of my being. From the darkness I saw light, a lantern in the hand of my father. Come now, he said. We don't have much time, darling. I took a step forward. One step sent a cascade of agony through me, stretching along my bones as if I'd been struck by lightning. I gritted my teeth and continued ahead, following my father through the void. Gradually, the darkness faded away, revealing the cave Inspector Mackenzie and I had investigated not hours prior. The masked man, the killer, the one that had attacked me, was on both knees, prostrated on the ground, mumbling prayers to the gigantic eyeball scratched into the stones. When we'd seen it in person, the eyeball was no more than a primitive design, but now it was animated. The spiral-shaped pupil moved about, scanning the room, observing the masked man. Please, give me the strength I require, the masked man begged. These are troubling times, and my spirit grows weaker by the day. Lend me your guidance. Instruct me. The cave began to tremble, and loose rocks rained from overhead. The several falcon heads came alive, their eyes glowing golden. The snakes on the ground resurrected, slithering around the masked man like rippling sea currents. A torrent of wind whistled in from the tunnels, flooding the main chamber, swirling around as a cacophony of noises. The masked man lifted from the ground. Yes, of course. The head of the snake. The drips come from the top. Thank you. He removed his hat and mask, and beneath was a fiery facade concealing the man's real face. We are blessed once more by your wisdom. And he began to chant in some foreign tongue. Suddenly the eye on the wall looked at me. The falcon heads turned toward me and squawked. The snakes lunged at me, fangs exposed. I recoiled, and when I opened my eyes, I was lying in bed, soaked with sweat, out of breath, and sore to the bone. The undertaker and the surgeon stood over my bedside, peering down with watchful eyes. A few moments later, Inspector Mackenzie appeared at the foot of the bed. Welcome back to the land of the living, he said. How do you feel? Slowly I sat up in bed, gritting my teeth against the pain resonating from my backside. What happened? Inspector Mackenzie filled me in on the last 12 hours. After our encounter with the masked man at George Barron's estate, he'd brought me to the undertaker for medical aid. You should have stayed on the damn killer, I growled. Because of you, he got away. Inspector Mackenzie tilted his head and furrowed his brow, bemused by my reaction, and a smile slipped over his lips. Of course, ma'am. I suspected you would have wanted me to save your life. I could have throttled him. Don't pretend like you were trying to save me, Harris. We both know that if I'd died on your watch, the director would have had you locked up or executed. The undertaker and surgeon excused themselves from the room. Inspector Mackenzie took a seat at my bedside and lit a cigarette. I laid there trying to summon the strength to get back on my feet, but I was nauseous and dizzy. A fog had clouded my mind, beckoning me to fall back asleep. How's your pain? He asked. Bearable, I said. I imagine it'll be less so once the morphine is completely worn off. A problem for later. He ashed his cigarette into a nearby tray. Now, what do you remember? I stared at him, unsure of how to answer. Without my revolver holstered to my side, I suddenly felt vulnerable in his presence. I remember chasing the suspect into the city. I was following him through the streets and alleyways. During one of the turns, he'd pressed himself against the wall, and I ran right past. By the time I realized it was too late, he was on top of me. Mackenzie nodded. Anything else? I remember his hands around my throat. I remember the world becoming darker and darker. And I remember thinking, I'm gonna die. Oh, and I remember... Inspector Mackenzie watched me with fervent curiosity, a similar expression he'd worn as the killer strangled me and he did nothing. And that's all I remember, I said. Well, the killer stabbed you in the back with a hunting knife. Don't worry, Inspector, it's since been removed. Your wounds are being cleaned, treated, and stitched. You'll be sore and need rest, but you'll recover. I climbed out of bed. Weakly, I shambled across the room for my clothes and gear. My shirt was ripped and stained with blood. There was a spare shirt, recently ironed, beside it. I dressed, which in itself was a chore. Then I fastened my holster. Inspector Mackenzie had to assist me. You remember if the killer had said anything to you? Mackenzie asked. He whispered something to me, I said. Pulvis at some else. Oh, I don't know. It wasn't English. Was it Pulvis et umbra sumus? Yeah, that sounds pretty close. Horace is Latin again? It means we are but dust and shadows. The excessive heat pervading through my body went cold. Oh, I know who the killer is. Inspector Mackenzie arched an eyebrow. Do tell. Wallace Green. He was one of the fur trappers that had found the steel mill workers in the forest. Heard him say something similar before leaving the crime scene. Green. That is interesting. Inspector Mackenzie went to my satchel bag and removed one of the ledgers. He flipped through the pages before setting it on the counter. Lloyd Bauer, the lawyer we found buried in the woods. He was here to investigate a life insurance claim for a Matilda Green, who died of heart failure 2 months prior. However, the claim hadn't fully matured. Therefore, the payout was only a fraction of its original amount. And it was all coming together. 3 men come down to Wormwood on business. Jack Nally, Franklin Waldeck, and Lloyd Bauer. They're friends of Richard Howard's. 2 of them are here to establish connections in the area for future prospects. The third, Lloyd Bauer, is here to investigate a life insurance claim belonging to Matilda Green. The payout isn't quite as promised since the insurance claim didn't fully mature. Wallace Green gets paid a small percentage of what he was promised. In response, Wallace Green seeks out Lloyd Bauer once he's departed the city. However, Lloyd is with his friends, Waldeck and Nally, as well as their escort companions. He's forced to kill all of them. But it doesn't stop there. Green enjoys this sense of vigilante justice. He continues to murder all those associated with Bauer. Richard Howard's a friend and business partner of the 3 men. Thomas Banks, a land agent, and John Ullers, the steel mill owner. Both involved with Jack Nally, planning for future business prospects. Anna Campbell, owner of the docks and shipping, and George Barron, her business partner and a local gangster. They'd met with Franklin Waldeck to establish connections for their trade. If any of those deals had prospered, Wormwood would have been infested and controlled by New York tycoons, running rampant with corruption, all because of an insurance claim payout. We have a motive, I said, but something still doesn't feel right about this. Why turn on Henry Ullers and the 4 shift managers? They'd help kill Johnson Ullers. Why bring the police out to the forest to find their bodies? All good questions, Inspector Mackenzie said. Maybe if we ask nicely, Mr. Green will have an answer for them. He returned the ledger to the satchel bag and closed it. However, I wouldn't expect too much sense or rationality from this individual. He sounds even more deranged than me. I didn't want to think about how deranged Inspector Mackenzie might have been at the time. That was for later. I wanted to capture our killer and question them further about their actions, to hear their confession, finish the assignment, and move on. We started through the undertaker's basement and up the stairs. He was in the lounge smoking from a pipe. I thanked him for his assistance, but when I offered to pay, he wouldn't accept. "You're doing God's work, Inspector," he said. "I could never charge you after everything you've sacrificed for this city." Well, the praise felt overly enthusiastic, especially since we still hadn't apprehended the killer. But there wasn't time to argue or act humble. I moved on, trying to flag down a carriage. Before I could, an officer hollered at us from down the block. He sprinted toward us, waving his hands over his head. "Inspector," he said, panting. "Chief Burris has been looking all over for you." "About what?" "Ma'am, he heard about George Barron and your failure to capture the murder suspect. He wants to speak with you about it." "All right, I'll stop by his office later." The officer reached down to the revolver at his hip. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we have orders to bring you in for questioning, immediately." I glanced back at Mackenzie. It was clear he wasn't going to weigh in on the matter, so I nodded. "Fine. We'll come back to the station with you." About 15 minutes later, we were in a carriage bound for the police station. I told the officer to take several men and go to Wallace Green's residence to apprehend him. The officer ignored me. At the station, we were led to Chief Burris's office. He sat behind his desk, frantically writing a letter. He looked up at us, frowned, and gestured to a chair across the desk. I sat, and Inspector Mackenzie remained at my side, standing. "Mrs. Darcy, I've summoned you here today to say I am appalled by your handling of this investigation," the chief began. Already I could tell this wasn't going to be an enjoyable conversation. "You've made a mockery of my department and your agency. My officers have been working around the clock, questioning suspects and collecting corpses. All the while, the killer is no closer to being caught." "Chief, we have a probable suspect." "Do I sound like I'm finished?" he yelled. I fell back into my seat, silent. The chief rubbed at his brow. His disappointment was palpable. His anger even more so. He turned to Inspector Mackenzie. "Dog, make yourself useful and pour us a drink." Inspector Mackenzie looked to me for command. I nodded, and he retreated to a table at the back of the room, lined with liquor bottles, steel mugs, and a container of chipped ice. Mackenzie retrieved a bottle of whiskey and began to pour. "We've seen more deaths in these last 3 days than the previous 6 months combined," Chief Burris continued, his anger directed solely at me. "We were told you were specialists, promised that you'd speed up the investigation. Yet I've not seen any evidence of your worth. These promises have fallen flat." "Chief, we have a suspect for these murders," I explained. "What do you know about Wallace Green?" "Wallace Green? One of the witnesses from yesterday's crime scene. That's your suspect?" "What do you know about him, sir?" He drummed his fingers against the desk as he considered it. Not much. He's a friend of Little Raj. Came to the city maybe 5 months ago. His mom was ill. I believe she died some time back." "Are you aware that his mother had a life insurance policy with Lloyd Bauer, one of the men we found buried in the woods yesterday? Are you aware that Lloyd Bauer refused to pay the full amount of that life insurance policy? Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like motive to me." "Are you mad or stupid?" Chief Burris asked. "You're saying Wallace Green went on a killing spree over a life insurance policy?" "I believe the policy payment was the start of it, yes. And that's how these situations work, how these individuals operate. The first murder is often personal, relating to financial gain or revenge. But after that first murder, repeat killers will often feel a sense of accomplishment for their actions. The act of killing makes them feel powerful, and so they seek it out again, hoping they might achieve that same sensation in their next murder. Yet it never quite lives up to that original experience," Inspector Mackenzie called out from the back of the room. "It's an addiction to them. A part of them logistically knows it's immoral, but they don't care. They dehumanize their victims, fail to recognize them as people. Instead, they might—" "Quiet," Chief Burris hollered. "Hurry up with those drinks and keep your damn mouth shut. Heard enough from you, Mutt. I have half a mind to put you down here, and now for all this madness you've brought up to my city." Inspector Mackenzie carried 2 cups over to the desk. He set one before Chief Burris and the other in front of me. Then he resigned himself to silence, standing at my side like a statue. "Inspectors, I've had enough of your shenanigans," Burris said. "I am officially removing you from this case. A train will arrive later this evening. You'll be put on it. In the meantime, I'll compose a letter and have it sent to your superiors, detailing your unethical and disgraceful participation in this case." "Which unethical and disgraceful behavior are you referring to, sir?" Inspector Mackenzie asked. Chief Burris glared at him with fire in his eyes. "I ought to put you through that wall, boy. Speak up again, see what happens." They turned back to me. "You tell us the killer's probably a butcher or slaughterman or doctor. Have my officers go around the city interviewing them. Then you tell me the killer is a fur trapper, Wallace Green." "You also said the killer might be a hunter," Inspector Mackenzie muttered. Chief Burris drew his revolver and slammed it down on the desk. His thumb lingered on the hammer, ready to draw it back. "I don't think I haven't heard about what happened at George Barron's saloon," he continued. "You might be associated with my department, but you do not have the authorization to assault the people of this city, regardless of their associations or alleged crimes. We tried to comply with your demands, the chief continued. We tried to follow your guidance on this case. You've led us nowhere, and in the process you've reprimanded my officers for doing their jobs.
They were following us, sir.
On my orders, damn it.
He downed his drink in one gulp and winced at the bitter burn.
Pour another one, Mutt. I've got to wash this taste out of my mouth.
Inspector Mackenzie retrieved his cup and went back to the liquor table.
I'll be frank with you, Inspector, he said. I don't like what you or your agency is doing. I don't see the purpose in allowing a man like that to walk the streets, much less entrust him to protect the health and well-being of the people. I think your agency's a joke, a means for some officials in the government to pad their pockets. I shudder to think Project Inferno will exist in 10 years.
Every second wasted at the chief's office was another moment for Wallace Green to kill again, or leave town. Yet my hands were tied. The agency couldn't conduct investigations without permission from local authorities. We were here merely to assist, and if our assistance was refused, we had to accept this and move on. Sir, if I may, we encountered the killer. I chased him through the streets.
And where is he? The chief asked. Why is he not sitting in front of me?
Well, heat flushed through my cheeks. He, got away, sir.
Specialist professionals. Instead, we get clowns wearing fancy suits.
Inspector Mackenzie returned with the chief's cup. He grabbed it from his hand, swallowed it in one drink, and shoved it back into his grasp.
I'll be officially requesting your superiors to have you.
He swayed a moment, blinking rapidly. Then he went limp and fell from his chair, snoring by the time he hit the floor.
What did you do? I asked. Slipped him a concentrated dose of laudanum.
Mackenzie kneeled beside Chief Burris and checked his pulse.
If I estimated his weight correctly, he should be all right. He'll wake up a little foggy, but otherwise no long-lasting side effects.
Well, I can think of one side effect, I said. He's going to send a witch hunt out for you.
Why?
Because he can't handle his liquor? You saw it, didn't you? Too much to drink. His breath reeks of whiskey, after all. I had to wonder if there were any lows Inspector Mackenzie wouldn't stoop to.
While the chief naps, perhaps we should continue our investigation, he suggested. Any particular place you'd like to begin?
I thought back to my dream. Mackenzie, consider all the victims thus far, I said. Who would be the head of the snake? He knitted his eyebrows together with consternation.
If Wallace Green is targeting all known associates of Lloyd Bower, I suppose the only reasonable conclusion would be Mayor Wright. Everyone else that dealt with Mr. Bower is already dead.
That's who'll be targeted next.
Poses an interesting question, Inspector. Should we go after Mr. Green at his residence and hope he's there? Or should we let him come to us?
Chapter 9. Tuesday, October 6th, 1891. Inspector Harris, Mackenzie. We arrived at the mayor's estate late in the evening. We paid the carriage rider and watched him depart, heading back for the city. Together, Inspector Darcy and I climbed the stone stairs to the front door. She knocked, and the housekeeper answered, donned in a black dress with a white apron, prim and proper as they come. Inspector Darcy and Inspector Mackenzie here to see Mayor Wright, Darcy said. Is he home? And the housekeeper was a fragile woman, pale-skinned and thin, hollow cheeks with sunken eyes. I was curious how many meals she had to serve without ever partaking, how much food had passed through her hands but never once met her lips. The hungry watching others gorge themselves. Mr. Wright is currently relaxing in the parlor, she explained. He isn't accepting company right now. Tell him it's urgent. The housekeeper closed the door, and a few minutes later she returned and allowed us entry, leading us to the parlor along the left wing of the house. The estate was similar to that of George Barron's home, but somehow it was even larger, furnished with more decorations from a bygone era.
Mayor Wright sat in a leather lounge chair before a brick fireplace, nursing a glass of scotch in one hand and a cigar in the other, most likely one smuggled from Germany. "Inspectors," he greeted, humor in his voice. "I must say I'm shocked to see you. My understanding was that you'd be dismissed from the murder investigation and sent home, yet here you are." "Yeah, here we are," Inspector Darcy agreed in a flat tone. "Mayor, we'll keep it short. We believe you're the killer's next target. Perhaps their last one, too." "Oh, is that so? On what basis?" "Those men we found buried in the forest yesterday, Jack Nally, Franklin Waldeck, and Lloyd Bower. Everyone that interacted with them during their visit to Wormwood is now dead. All save for you, sir." He contemplated the inspector's words in silence. Ashes sprinkled from the tip of Mayor Wright's cigar, flittering through the air, joining the embers spitting from the fireplace. "Sir, we expect the killer will come for you tonight," Inspector Darcy added. "If you'd permit us, we'd like to stay." "To keep me safe?" he asked, amused. "To catch them in the act." He stared at the flames, his face awash with shadows and glints of red light. "You can sit on the front porch for the remainder of the evening. If your killer hasn't come by daybreak, I expect both of you to leave this city and never return. We have enough madness as is. We don't need any more." He leaned forward in his seat and pointed to a cabinet at the back corner of the room. "Inspector, if you'll be watching over me tonight, you'll need that." Inspector Darcy went to the cabinet and opened it. Within was a collection of firearms, revolvers ranging from the late 1860s to current day, double-barreled shotguns, rifles of all kinds, along with an abundance of ammunition. "If the killer comes," Mayor Wright said, "don't let him get close." Inspector Darcy chose a lever-action 1886 Winchester rifle, a polished wooden stock with a nickel steel barrel. She held the weapon with a serious expression. She worked the lever a few times, listening to the shifting of metal. Then she inspected the loading port and sights before retrieving a pack of rounds. With that settled, we were given leftovers from the mayor's supper and a lantern. The inspector and I sat in a pair of rocking chairs on the front porch, passing a plate of beans, buttered bread, and roasted venison, heavily seasoned with salt, pepper, and saffron. The lantern hung from a hook on a nearby post, swaying back and forth against the wind. Streaks of light ebbed and flowed around us, highlighting the profile of Inspector Darcy's face. There was a bruise on her cheek from where the masked man had punched her, and the skin around her eye was taking a bluish hue. "How's your back?" I asked. "The muscles are getting stiff," she admitted. "Hurts like a son of a bitch." I retrieved the vial of laudanum from my pocket and offered it to her. Surprisingly, she took the bottle and downed about a teaspoon. She grimaced against the bitter taste and quickly lit a cigarette to combat it. The rifle sat across her lap, her finger resting on the trigger. The barrel pointed in my direction. Her eyes, though, remained on the front yard, searching the growing shadows, waiting for movement. "I saw you," she said, "back in the alleyway when that man was going to strangle me to death. I saw you standing there watching." "Would you believe me if I said I panicked?" She laughed and passed me the carton of cigarettes. I placed one between my lips and struck a match. The tobacco crackled against the wavering flame, casting smoke into the air around my head. "If the killer doesn't show," she said, "we're down a creek without a paddle." "Well, the killer will come," I said. "They know they're running out of time. This might be their last chance." "What if he goes after someone else tonight?" "No one else comes close to being the head of the snake. Mayor Wright runs this town, oversees everyone and everything. They'll want his blood before anyone else's." She removed her cigarette and exhaled smoke. It drifted through the air, gradually dispersing. For a moment, I could see figures and shapes in the smoke, shifting about like spilled ink on paper. One of these shapes looked like an eye, staring at me, watching me, judging me. "Yeah, I wasn't going to let him kill you," I said. "If he'd wanted to kill you, he would have kept strangling you. But when he let you go, I was curious about what he'd do next." "He stabbed me. I don't think he had any disinclination about murdering me." "He stabbed you in the back. avoiding major organs. If he'd wanted you dead, he could have slit your throat or stabbed you through the heart or bashed your head against the stones. The killer doesn't want your life. They want your attention. She pondered this while her eyes roved over the stars. Did I ever tell you about my father? How he used to take me hunting? Deer, elk, ducks mostly. He always told me to mind my surroundings. So many hunters focus on the buck that they lose sight of everything else. They wind up tripping and falling down a hill, or walking right in front of the barrel of another hunter. She smiled. Memories of her father seemed to be the only thing that ever brought any sense of joy to her. Now, don't go running into the dark after your prey. That's how you wind up surrounded by wolves. That's what he used to tell me, and I'd ask him, if we're not supposed to chase the deer, what do we do? You know what we did, Inspector Mackenzie?
No, ma'am.
We'd bring a hunting dog. When it got dark, we'd let it off the leash. Let it track the deer for us, and if it encountered the wolves first, we'd know what we were walking into. Well, I chuckled. That's awfully clever. A little cruel, too. Feeding your hounds to another predator. Maybe it was cruel, but those mutts weren't exactly sweethearts. They'd growl at you. Sometimes nip your hand if you got too close. You had to be strict with them. Keep them on a firm leash. Only let them loose when it was absolutely necessary. But I never got upset when those dogs bit me. It's just their nature. In the distance came the sound of galloping horse hooves. We rose from our chairs and descended the front steps. A rider approached from over the hill, followed by 3 more, all dressed in dark coats with masks on their heads. The one at the center wore a bowler hat. Looks like Mr. Green brought some friends. You didn't think he was alone, did you? I asked. Too many bodies for one person to handle alone. I guess I was being optimistic, Inspector. The riders dismounted from their horses about a quarter of a mile off. They walked the rest of the way, stopping maybe 50 feet out from us. The man at the center glanced at his accomplices and nodded. They removed their masks, dropping them to the ground. Wallace Green was the leader of the pack. To his left was Roger Young, Little Rog, and Mr. Barron's giant bodyguard. To his right was the Undertaker's assistant and niece, Siler Barrett. The wind swept through, pulling at the weeds around their feet, tearing at the tails of their coats. Polves et umbra sumus, Wallace Green said. Omnes una manet nox, I returned. Mr. Green snorted. An educated man, I see. Won't find many of them in these parts. He tugged back on his coat, revealing a revolver at his hip. His fingers slid around the grip, thumb poised on the hammer. Our fight isn't with you, inspectors. I recommend you leave this place while you still can. You know we can't do that, Darcy said. You'd rather protect that piece of filth than save yourselves? It's not about protecting him. It's about putting an end to your massacre. We did this world a favor, he said bitterly. Those men were going to bring hell upon us, infect our city with their corruption. But you didn't just stop them, did you? You didn't just stop them, though, did you? You really think Richard Howard's or Thomas Banks were any better? The Campbells or Barron or Ullers deserved to live. They were feeding upon the folks of Wormwood, sucking the blood from our veins. What about the girls, the escorts? Wallace Green tensed at this. They were traitors, ma'am, just as low as the rest of us, but they abandoned us, left with those men because they knew it was more profitable. They knew about the suffering we'd experienced and kept their mouths shut to benefit their own lives. That's not how a community persists. That's not how we save this country. Darcy shifted the rifle stock against her right shoulder. Why mutilate them? If you wanted to kill them out of some sense of vigilante justice, I can understand that. But the dismembering, the desecration, that I can't fathom. It's just about sending a message, ma'am, he explained. We here at Wormwood look out for one another. We don't tolerate liars or cheats or corruption. Kill a few bad men, more will replace them in time. Rip them apart? No one forgets that. No one dares to follow in their same footsteps, unless they're mad or stupid. Inspector Darcy looked over the 4 killers with a mixture of sorrow and disgust. Lay your weapons on the ground and turn yourselves in. I won't give you another chance. I'm afraid, ma'am, we can't do that. There's a higher authority to play here. True judgment. And no one evades his wrath. Do the rest of you stand with him?
The three others were silent and unmoving. They pushed aside their coats and reached for the weapons holstered at their hips. My hand maneuvered beneath my jacket and gripped my service revolver. Living is easy with eyes closed, isn't it? Wallace Green asked. Might as well be asleep or dead. All that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. We don't have to do this, Darcy said, almost pleading. You'll be given a fair trial. I'll see to that myself. Please lay down your weapons. Baron's bodyguard was the first to draw. Inspector Darcy aimed her rifle and fired. The bullet hit him on the shoulder, wrenching his body to the side, throwing his aim off. His bullet went sailing into the night sky. I drew my revolver and opened fire on him. The others scattered across the field, firing upon us. Darcy and I split, taking cover behind a pair of retaining walls. Bullets collided against the bricks, sending debris and dust into the air. The gunshots cracked across the sky like thunder, and smoke wafted from their barrels. Inspector Darcy laid down cover fire while I inched closer, moving from the retaining wall to a decorative bench to a commemorative stone with a plaque remembering the Confederate Army. The top of the bodyguard's head exploded and he dropped. Lil Raj ran toward him. I opened fire, catching him on the side before he could dive behind an incline. The rest of my bullets peppered the ground, and chunks of earth flew through the air. Reloading, I called. A bullet struck the side of the commemorative stone, not inches from my head. I turned. Scylla Barrett stood to my right with a revolver raised, hammer cocked back. A bullet struck her beneath the ribs, sending her to the ground, flat on her back. And Wallace Green charged in, a revolver in either hand. He fired wildly upon Inspector Darcy, forcing her behind the retaining wall. I ejected spent cartridges from the chamber and loaded another round of bullets. Overhead, black clouds swirled and churned, unending. They formed an oval-shaped ring with an open patch at their center. The stars seemed to compress within, forming a pupil of golden yellow. The night was a deep shade of purple, and the moon shone silver. A weight settled over my body, as if the world were pressing down on me. "Harris!" Inspector Darcy yelled. I turned just as Lil Raj crested the hillside. I snapped the revolver's chamber into place, cocked the hammer, and fired. 2 bullets struck him along the abdomen. The last caught him on the chin, stripping away a fair amount of skin and muscle. Lil Raj collapsed, dead by the time he met the dirt. To my right, Inspector Darcy leapt out from behind cover. She aimed her rifle across the field. Wallace Green and Scylla Barrett were running toward a swathe of trees. She fired 3 times. Her last bullet nicked Wallace Green. Then they were gone, disappearing into the woods. Chapter 10. Wednesday, October 7th, 1891. Inspector Eleanor Darcy. We ran across the lawn. I lagged back, letting Inspector Mackenzie pass me. He entered the woods first. We followed the footprints and the blood, ducking beneath branches and weaving around trees. A bullet cut the air between us, accompanied by the ring of a gunshot. Inspector Mackenzie crouched behind a fallen acacia. I took cover behind a boulder swarmed by moss and beetles. Ahead, Wallace Green was hunkered behind a willow tree with silvery leaves. Through the dark, I could see the glimmer of perspiration on his face. Blood soaked the left side of his body, originating from along his flank. "Wallace, you can end this here and now," I called out. "Throw down your weapons and surrender." "True justice is absolute," he said. "No surrender, no compromise, no turning back. The sun rises and sets. We're born, we live, and we die. That's the natural order, Inspector." He was starting to sound like Mackenzie. "The men from the steel mill," I said. "Why kill them?" He laughed. "They wanted to turn themselves in, even after everything we'd done for them. We don't tolerate corruption.
We don't tolerate cowardice, not even from our own. I glanced over at Inspector Mackenzie. We spoke with our eyes alone. Mackenzie advanced from the left and I came from the right, crawling through the mud and weeds, rifle in hand. Wallace Green focused fire on the left side. I charged forward while he attacked Mackenzie. A twig snapped underfoot. Wallace ripped around to face me. He pushed away from the tree, lifted his weapon. But I fired first, hitting him in the chest. I would later find out my shot was exactly 3 inches from his heart. The muzzle of his revolver flashed, and I braced, but still the bullet sent me stumbling. I collided with an oak tree, desperately trying to stay on my feet. The bullet had grazed my left leg, a minor injury, but the pain was severe. Blood seeped from the wound, soaking into my trousers. Wallace Green laid on the ground, wheezing. His chest shuddered with every breath. His face was drenched with sweat. His eyes were filled with tears. I watched as Inspector Mackenzie approached him. Wallace perched on one elbow, teeth gritted to keep himself from crying out. "Everything made by man must be destroyed by man," he said. "Nature makes neither kings nor rich men." "A fan of Rousseau, are we?" Mackenzie asked. "Such a bright young mind. Shame you decided to throw your life away like this. You might have achieved something far greater." Wallace laughed despite how much pain it brought him. "I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. An investment in knowledge pays the best interest," Mackenzie countered. "Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's wisdom. Awareness of ignorance is the beginning of wisdom." "Wisdom is not wisdom when it's derived from books alone," Wallace said. And to this, Inspector Mackenzie chuckled and said, "Well played." By then I'd found the strength to walk again. I hobbled over to where Wallace laid and told Mackenzie, "Find the surgeon. I'll catch up." He started further into the forest. It was just Wallace Green and myself now. He didn't have much time left. Even a blind man could see that. Partially submerged in the mud, Wallace Green fully reclined with a frown on his face, wrinkled lips, narrowed eyes, stiff fingers digging into the dirt, his heart slowing with every beat. "My condolences, Mr. Green, for your mother," I said. "If you have any final words, I'll hear them now." He looked up at me and smiled. "My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings," he said. "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." And with that he closed his eyes and breathed his final breath. I sat beside him, reconciling everything that had occurred over the last few days. God, it had felt like a month-long investigation, but it had barely been 3 days, and already I'd suffered 2 injuries. The laudanum had helped mitigate the pain, but my leg throbbed with fiery intensity that made me want to scream. Slowly I rose to my feet. I took 1 step forward and stopped. My father stood amongst the trees, staring up at the night sky. I joined him, remembering the days when we used to stargaze. He taught me all about the constellations and the rotation of the Earth. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But on that night I wondered if the sun would ever rise again. An irrational concern, I'm aware, but I couldn't refute it at the time. "Am I doing the right thing?" I asked. My father's only response was to smile, and then he was gone. I continued through the trees, limping along until I caught the soft sound of low voices. Ahead I could see Inspector Mackenzie standing amongst the weeds. At his feet the surgeon laid at the base of a sycamore tree, one arm extended, revolver in hand. I began to lift my rifle but stopped, curious about what she would do next. "There's nothing this world fears more than someone who lives against the grain," she said to him. "You know that better than many, don't you?" "Well, there's nothing this world fears more than collapse," he replied. "To watch a trusted system crumble right before your very eyes. And you know that better than any." "Sometimes systems need to collapse. All towers must fall, all dominions must perish. Nothing is permanent, nothing is truly sacred." "Is that what Ozymandias taught you?" "It's what I have to believe," she said. Otherwise, what's the point? If we create an eternal system, that means we'll be stuck repeating the same mistakes, following the same orders, doing the same thing over and over. Well, there's a bit of hypocrisy there, he said. Forever starting again is repetition too. But a new day has a chance of being better than yesterday. And if it's worse? And then there's always tomorrow, she said, releasing the revolver, letting it fall to the ground beside her. Don't worry, Inspector. It was empty anyway. Mackenzie took aim with his weapon and pulled back the hammer. Why did you help him? You could have had a bright future. The man refused to pay the insurance policy, the surgeon explained. Wally didn't even have enough to cover his mother's funeral. So, you and your uncle helped him out, didn't you? That's how you met. These are dreadful times, Inspector. We can't help our families, can't help ourselves. We starve while they grow fat. We work ourselves to death, never accomplishing anything more than moving the dirt it takes to bury us. We're supposed to just accept that? She laid her hand on the ground and stared up at the sky, smiling. I refuse to work in a world like that. From one dog to another, he said. I wish you the best in whatever comes next. And then he pulled the trigger. The bullet struck her between the eyes, blowing out the back of her skull into a mixture of blood, bone, and brains. He holstered his pistol and turned to me. Don't worry, Inspector. It's over now. At least as far as we're concerned. Thursday, October 8th, 1891. Inspector Eleanor Darcy. After the shootout at Mayor Wright's estate, the police came to collect the bodies and make their official reports. Inspector Mackenzie and I gave our testimonies, wrote reports of our findings, and cleared from the scene. We were kept at our local lodging for the remainder of the night, and when morning came, Chief Burris delivered us to the train station himself. We found a journal amongst Mr. Green's things, he explained. There's a passage near the end that you might want to see. He turned the journal toward us, and we read the message. From the corrupt have fallen blind to our woes. They're deaf to our pleas no matter how loud we scream. They attempt to lie and deceive with every word. It seems only fair they should wander the underworld, deaf, blind, and mute for all eternity. Chief Burris closed the journal and returned it to his bag. I withheld my complaints to your office, he said. Now, go on and do me a favor. Don't ever come back to my city. Don't give us a reason to, I replied. The train had come into the station by then. We climbed aboard and stored our luggage. We found a pair of seats in the common car and smoked while we waited for the train to depart from the station. Once we were in motion, I turned to Inspector Mackenzie. Hey, you really think we made a difference here? Oh, we made a difference. Whether that difference has been positive or negative is purely subjective. He ashed his cigarette and continued. But I think this reaches further than we believe. How do you mean? Think about all the people who were murdered, high-standing figures, and no one reported them missing. We may have caught 4 of our killers, but I wouldn't be surprised if more people had been involved. I wouldn't be surprised if Mayor Wright meets his demise in the coming weeks. Shouldn't we stay then? He laughed. I don't think Chief Burris would allow us to even do it if we wanted to. All that matters is we have our primary perpetrators. Case closed. We move on. You don't think anything will come of this? Honestly, Inspector, no, he said. Project Inferno is an experimental program. We're barely a legitimate agency. We'll write our reports, they'll get shuffled along and seen by countless officials, but I personally don't believe anything will come of it. Not in the way you're hoping. Oddly enough, that didn't affect me in the way I'd expected. After everything we'd been through, it was hard for me to care. Really, all I wanted was a little rest before our next assignment. To recover from my injuries, maybe sleep without having to dream. Everything we do is an experiment, Inspector Mackenzie explained. Our superiors are fine-tuning the formula to develop something else. I don't know exactly what, but in 10, maybe 20 years, Project Inferno won't exist. I'm sure they'll go to great lengths to wipe the records clean, as if we never existed at all. Instead, we'll be replaced by another agency. An agency that can be publicly endorsed by the president without drawing mass contempt from the people.
What's the point then? I asked. Why bother investigating? Why bother doing anything if none of it matters?
Well, 100 years from now, we'll be in the ground. And the world will keep spinning. Society will march on, as they say.
And?
But, he corrected, putting emphasis on the word. The only way the world outlives us if there are people to ensure it doesn't collapse first. All castles must crumble, all civilizations must come to an end. It's inevitable. The question is, how long can we keep it from turning to ruins?
People to ensure it doesn't collapse, I said. What do you mean by that?
Morally good people, he clarified. People like you, Inspector.
You don't think any of them were good? They weren't trying to keep their society from collapsing?
I believe they were good in their own way, he admitted. No man chooses evil because it's evil. He only mistakes it for happiness, the good he seeks.
Outside, the landscape passed by in a blur. Trees to swathes of cornstalks to prairie fields. We rode through the countryside of America, staring out at the sunlit horizon, at rushing river currents with water glittering like glass. Everyday people traversed the plains in wagons, on horseback or on foot, some of them with friends, others accompanied by their families. Over 10 people were murdered in Wormwood, not 50 miles away, and yet the rest of the world continued oblivious.
Harris, be honest with me, I said. Always, ma'am.
Do you care about the assignments we work? Do you actually care about protecting society?
Of course, he said. It's much easier to destroy than preserve, and I have never refused a challenge.
So, no then. You don't care about protecting society. You just want to see how long you can preserve it.
Does my intention really matter? He asked. Our goals are the same, even if our ambitions differ.
I just wanted to know if you were on the same side here.
I guess you'll just have to trust me.
I scoffed. Trust would require faith. Faith can be very dangerous when applied to the wrong people.
Or the wrong systems, he said,
and he rose from his seat and stretched.
Rest assured, Inspector. I may not always seem it, but I'm still as much of a human as you. My survival instincts are the same, if not more insistent.
I have faith that you'll do anything to avoid execution, I said, before he could get away. I have faith that you'll do anything to stay out of an asylum, and I have faith that you'll know playing the part of a disciplined hound will serve these purposes far more than anything else. He smiled.
A good pup should never bite the hand that feeds.
He started down the aisle for his private compartment, but stopped short.
Inspector, do you know who Sappho is?
Should I? He chuckled.
No, I suppose not. She wrote poems a very long time ago. In one of them she said, "You may forget, but let me tell you this. Someone in some future time will think of us. You try to keep that in mind whenever you feel despondent about our work."
And he was gone. I sat alone, looking out of the window. Smoke wafted around me as ashes overtook my cigarette. Some cases aren't always about uncovering every last grain of truth, but rather about surviving so you can work another assignment. When I turned to the seat across from me, I saw my father sitting there.
"Believe nothing you hear," he said, "and only half of what you see."
Reality is what we perceive. We get to choose what's true and what isn't. For me, I choose to believe the case was over. Well, I can't say for certain if we did the right thing or not by stopping the killers. I can say that we finished the case in a timely manner. We done our duty and put the investigation to bed. At the end of the day, that was our job. That's all we could do. Postface. Again, I feel it's important to remind readers that the following information came from the entries provided by Inspector Eleanor Darcy and her partner, Inspector Harris Mackenzie. Both were agents with Project Inferno during the late 19th century, which would later be adapted into what we now know as the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
This forerunner experimental program, known as Project Inferno, aligned renowned detectives with criminal-coded individuals so to assist local police departments across America. Since its inception, the program has been forgotten due to its morally questionable decisions and lack of government regulation. The prior story was adapted from entries written by Inspector Eleanor Darcy and Inspector Harris Mackenzie, detailing their 11th case together, an assignment known as the Wormwood Murders. These entries were updated to adhere to contemporary English. Translation errors have been accounted for, but the story remains relatively the same nonetheless. Now, legally this piece must be promoted as fictitious. Everything you have read may or may not have happened. The final verdict will be left up to the reader's interpretation to determine the validity of these events. And we should keep in mind that Inspector Eleanor Darcy and Inspector Harris Mackenzie recorded these accounts based on their own perspectives and beliefs. Whether everything they'd witnessed was true or not is equivocal at best. Hopefully the effort of these individuals will not continue to go unnoticed. Whether you agree with their choices, actions, or ideals is subjective. Regardless, I believe it's important to still acknowledge their existence and contributions to society. Thank you for reading. Okay, my dear friends, so a 3-hour epic, and I've just read the last 5 chapters of that pretty much all in one go, and as you know, my brain tends to turn to absolute mush after doing that, so sorry if my little ramble here at the end is not making much sense. Oh, it's been a long time since I did one of these 3-hour classics, and, well, I'm glad it's over, to be honest with you. I really enjoyed that one, and I hope you all did too. So thoughts, feelings, anything you want to say in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I'll do my best to join in the conversation. Brain really is gone here, so thanks for listening, and I really do hope you enjoyed that one. I loved it. Till the next time, my dear friends, remember it's only a story and you sleep well, okay? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.